Lin Feng galloped towards Zhou Qixia and said with a respectful tone, "Officer." Lin Feng galloped towards Zhou Qixia and said with a respectful tone, "Officer." Lin Feng, your tent is still in the same place. Now you are a lieutenant, so feel at ease within the Qixia troops. You can do as you wish with the soldiers. If there is any danger, you can handle it as you wish, but I want these two back when you are done. If they leave, I'm losing 2 lieutenants, said Zhou Qixia while pointing at Han Man and Pajun who were behind Lin Feng. Officer, does this mean we can join the Celestial Sword Unit? Said Han Man while looking excited. If he could work with Lin Feng, he wouldn't care about his lieutenant status and would follow Lin Feng's orders. No, return to your units now, said Zhou Qixia. Han Man and Pajun smiled wryly and said, Roger, officer. After saying that, they smiled wryly while looking at Lin Feng and immediately went back to their units. Lin Feng, these 2 guys, I still need them. Sooner or later, they will be under your command, said Zhou Qixia with a mysterious tone. Immediately after, he added, you can go now. All right, said Lin Feng while slightly nodding and moved aside. Lin Feng at that moment, a clear and distinct voice emerged. Lin Feng turned around and saw Duan Xinyi waving to him. You guys can wait for me here, said Lin Feng to Ba Dao and the others. Immediately after, he went towards the princess and asked, what's the problem? There must be a problem in order for me to speak with you. You are my personal guard, said Duan Xinyi while giving a sweet smile towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng didn't know how to reply. Lin Feng, come with me to my tent. Qiu Chao will make us some tea and we can talk for a while, said Duan Xinyi. Lin Feng remained silent. You don't feel like it? Well, forget about it then. You can leave, said Duan Xinyi when she saw that Lin Feng remained silent. She looked disappointed, yet tried to smile. Lin Feng turned his horse around. Duan Xinyi nibbled on her lip and a bitter feeling invaded her heart. Usually, it was young men who would always chase her, but she always rejected them. She didn't even look at the handsome young men in the city. However, she was interested in Lin Feng, that frivolous and unrestrained young man. She started to have feelings for him. She had finally gathered the courage to invite him and he rejected her like she did with all the noble young men before. You guys can go back to the tent without me, said Lin Feng, which reached Duan Xinyi's ears. She then saw him turn around. A sweet and soft smile appeared on her face. Her grief turned into happiness. Initially, Lin Feng didn't refuse her offer, he was just ordering his troops to go back. Princess, said Lin Feng while moving back to Duan Xinyi. Let's go. Duan Xinyi's hair was floating on the wind while the horse galloped. At that moment, many people were following her. Lin Feng also closely followed alongside her and hadn't noticed that some people were evilly looking at the couple. Humph, groaned someone near Lu Zonglan. Lu Zonglan was stupefied. He then looked at the angered person and said, Fei Fei, you have to handle things like this properly. Handle what properly, said Lu Fei while gnashing her teeth. Immediately after, she left. She was secretly cursing at Lin Feng in her heart. What a pervert. General, it seems like Princess Duan Xinyi is interested in Lin Feng. She'll become Fei Fei's rival in the future, said Zhou Qixia in a low voice. These older men were slightly angry at the princess. They noticed that Duan Xinyi didn't look at Lin Feng the same way she looked at other people. Duan Xinyi always smiled at people in a friendly manner, but when she smiled to Lin Feng, it was more than that, it was soft, sweet and tender. The first awakening of love, tender feelings like water, girls couldn't hide such feelings. Everybody could see them in their facial expression, just like Lu Fei. Lu Zonglan smiled wryly and shook his head. He then quietly looked at the silhouette leaving. The silhouette was wearing armor, but he didn't forget that underneath they were still holy and pure. As before, he was amazed. Duan Xinyi's tent was tastefully furnished. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and tidy, which made it easy to set one's mind at ease and feel relaxed. At that moment, Lin Feng and Duan Xinyi were sitting on the floor by a hardwood table. "Princess, Master Lin, tea is ready." Qiu Chao arrived in front Duan Xinyi and Lin Feng and served them some tea. Lin Feng hastily took his cup of tea while smiling and said, "Girl, there is no need to stick with such formalities." Lin Feng wasn't used to being served by someone else. "Master Lin, you are the princess guest, this is my duty," said the servant while smiling. She had two dimples appear on her cheeks when she smiled. She was extremely cute. She was very young, about 15 years old. Lin Feng was only smiling, but didn't say anything. Actually, Qiu Chao was also a slave. She was already very lucky to be able to work for the princess. Besides, Duan Xinyi seemed to treat her well. Qiu Chao respected Duan Xinyi but didn't fear her. Duan Xinyi was the farthest thing from a cruel person. "Princess, the battlefield is such a dangerous place, why did you need to come here?" asked Lin Feng, who didn't understand why Duan Xinyi was there. What was the point of having the princess on the battlefield? "I've spent too much time in the imperial palace. I was breathing the same stuffy air every single day, so thought that I had to see something else and decided to come and see the brave and courageous soldiers on the battlefield," said Duan Xinyi in a soft voice while smiling. Many people were dreaming of living in the imperial palace, but those who really lived in it had the feeling that it was like a prison and needed to see the outside world. "Lin Feng, do you like the zither?" suddenly asked Duan Xinyi. Lin Feng slightly nodded and said, "I do. I will play the zither for you." When Duan Xinyi saw that Lin Feng nodded, she smiled and looked excited. At that moment, Qiu Chao went and picked up an ancient zither. She cleaned the table and put the zither on the spotless table. It was a very cozy feeling. Duan Xinyi was smiling. She put both of her hands on the zither and started playing slowly. Lin Feng was looked at Duan Xinyi. She was beautiful, graceful and elegant. Once in a while, she would raise her head and smile. That smile was enchanting. Regardless of social status, her beauty and elegance sufficed to make any normal man go crazy. No wonder every single noble young man hoped to marry the princess. Such a beautiful woman, who on top of that had the status of princess and possessed a powerful blood spirit, she could tempt most men. Duan Xinyi started playing a melody which made Lin Feng imagine a calm stream running through a bamboo forest. Zither connoisseurs could easily tell what kind of personality and temperament a person had when they listened to them playing the zither. She was as cool as a mountain stream, like an orchid in the middle of a peaceful mountain. Lin Feng slowly closed his eyes and calmly listened to the wonderful music. He was feeling happy. Being with Duan Xinyi, he didn't feel like he needed to be cautious, he could relax. He felt joyful in his heart. Duan Xinyi, once in a while, was raising her head to look at Lin Feng. When she saw that Lin Feng was closing his eyes and seemed to be completely relaxed, the smile on her face was becoming sweeter and sweeter. Inside the tent, the atmosphere was calm and peaceful. Only the sound of the zither filled the air. But at that moment, Lin Feng, who was firmly closing his eyes while listening to the music, suddenly had a strange sensation. He suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were completely black and expressionless. The world around him had become slow and he was now within his world of darkness. Without the slightest hesitation, he grabbed a dagger and slashed through the air. Kacha! His dagger ended up cutting an arrow down mid-air, which passed near Lin Feng's cheek. A strong wind was blowing against the tent and raised its heavy curtains. Immediately after, a silhouette flickered through the air like an illusion. Lin Feng could feel the danger incoming. Lin Feng raised his dagger again as he could feel a sword moving towards him. Lin Feng moved his dagger towards the illusionary figure, but it had no effect. Psh. Psh. Lin Feng's dagger arrived at the enemy's chest, but what shocked him was the opponent used his right hand to block Lin Feng's and used his left hand to throw an extremely sharp arrow towards the princess behind Lin Feng. The entire situation happened at the speed of lightning. Even though the opponent didn't care about his own life, they were determined to kill the princess before they died. An assassin. Lin Feng's heart was pounding. The opponent's arrow which he had thrown was much too quick. It had almost reached its destination and Lin Feng was unable to stop it. And if he didn't block it, Princess Duan Xinyi would definitely die. That assassin was at the 5th Ling Qi layer. That sword was extremely brutal and the assassin was determined to exchange their life for the princess' life. 8 Strikes of Desolation. Without hesitating, Lin Feng launched his 8 Strikes of Desolation, but it only caused the arrow to deviate slightly. 8 Strikes of Desolation. Without hesitating, Lin Feng launched his 8 Strikes of Desolation, but it only caused the arrow to deviate slightly. As if Lin Feng had anticipated this, he raised his hand at the speed of lightning and launched his chi forward to block the arrow. Psh. Lin Feng's chi only barely struck against the arrow to slow it, but the arrow still pierced through it. Xinyi, dodge, shouted Lin Feng furiously. Lin Feng's sword was still in the opponent's chest. Lin Feng released an incredible amount of sword energy inside the assassin's body. The assassin met a terrifyingly brutal death. Psh. Lin Feng turned around and his face turned deathly pale. He only barely saw the arrow penetrate into flesh. But it wasn't the princess at all, it was Qiu Chao. A moment before, Qiu Chao had thrown herself in front of Duan Xinyi in order to protect her. Qiu Chao, shouted Duan Xinyi with a sorrowful scream. After that, a hole appeared in the roof of the tent and vines descended from the sky, grabbed Duan Xinyi's body and lifted her into the air. She is staying here, shouted Lin Feng. He jumped up in the air and slashed out with the chi from his long sword. At the same time, another silhouette fell from the sky. A long blade struck against the sword chi of Lin Feng and destroyed it. Duan Xinyi's silhouette, in the blink of eye, disappeared from the tent and was taken away by the vines. Lin Feng was astonished. His face was deathly pale. What a skillful attack! Besides, even the weakest person was at the 5th Ling Qi layer. Lin Feng alone couldn't block all of them. An endless qi suddenly emerged from Lin Feng's sword and it was followed by a horrible shriek. The energy from the opponent's sword was completely dispersed. Lin Feng was furious and launched a lethal, unavoidable attack at the opponent. Boom! The sword qi caused the tent to explode into small pieces. Lin Feng looked around at his surroundings. He looked furious. When Lin Feng saw the opponents attempting to escape, he immediately jumped up into the air in pursuit, but at that moment a fist struck his face, sending him backwards. Get out of my way, shouted Lin Feng extremely loudly when he saw the armored person blocking his way. Lin Feng had been pushed back to the tent by that powerful strike to his face. How is Her Majesty, the princess? Asked the person while looking at the tent. When that person saw that Lin Feng wasn't replying, they continued, What have you done to the princess? Lin Feng had the sensation that the assassins were already close to escaping. He had no time for useless conversations. He moved forwards and brandished his sword. Humph! The armored person smiled coldly and shouted, Arrows ready. When they finished talking, a group of silhouettes suddenly came into vision and raised their bows. They were all aiming at Lin Feng. At that moment, a sharp force rushed towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng's facial expression changed, he knew that he was trapped. He quickly retreated and asked the armored person, Was it you? That person ignored Lin Feng's question and shouted in an extremely cold voice, What have you done to the princess? When he finished talking, he took a step towards the half-destroyed tent. He then saw that there was only a female's corpse, however it was not the princess, instead it was Cao Qiu. Obviously, the princess wasn't there anymore. Hand over the princess, shouted the armored person. His facial expression was extremely sharp. He slightly raised his hand and at that moment, the myriad of silhouettes pulled back the string of their bows ready to fire towards Lin Feng at any moment. Lin Feng suddenly smiled and laughed insolently. His two dark and expressionless eyes were staring at that person and he said in an ice-cold tone, Not only do you plan to assassinate the princess but you also want to make up false charges against me, in order to kill me. "I don't understand what you're saying," said the person while staring at Lin Feng in a cold and indifferent way. He then said, "How dare you mention the princess' life and your own life in the same sentence? You're thinking too highly of yourself. Even though your status of lieutenant was granted to you by Lu Zhonglan, today, you killed the princess servant and helped kidnap the princess. If you don't provide explanations, you will die here." Lin Feng was smiling coldly. How could he explain things clearly? At the moment when the princess was being kidnapped, they were all waiting close to the tent. How could they have not seen the kidnappers escaping? Besides, at the moment when Lin Feng was chasing the kidnappers, they had intercepted Lin Feng and stopped his pursuit. Of course, they had prepared this because they wanted to take Lin Feng's life. The fact that Lin Feng had killed the princess servant and kidnapped the princess spread very quickly amongst the troops. An incredible amount of people were heading towards the princess wrecked tent. In the blink of an eye, the situation became chaotic. Duan Tianlang had also come once he heard the news. "Lin Feng, the princess was kind to you, you are her personal guard and surprisingly you dare commit such a crime. Now, tell us where the princess is," shouted Duan Tianlang while staring at Lin Feng. Lin Feng couldn't provide an explanation. Even if Lin Feng provided an explanation, nobody was going to believe him. Duan Tianlang and the others had already declared him as an offender. As far as they were concerned, Lin Feng was the one who had killed Qiu Chao and kidnapped the princess. At that moment, Lin Feng wasn't sure if Duan Tianlang was responsible or it was another person within the military. "Duan Tianlang, are you not the person at the origin of this?" said Lin Feng coldly. If it was really Duan Tianlang, that was really too shameless. The first arrow was actually aimed at Princess Duan Xinyi. If Lin Feng hadn't done his best to intercept it, Duan Xinyi would have died. "You will never stop until you're dead," shouted Duan Tianlang in an ice-cold tone. He then immediately continued, "I will give you some time to think. If you don't tell where the princess is, I will kill you as punishment." When he finished talking, he lit an oil lamp and then a deadly energy emerged from his body as he moved towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng looked cold and indifferent. A murderous light flashed in his eyes. If Duan Tianlang was really at the origin of this was a good opportunity. Why wasn't he killing him on the spot though and provided him with time to think about giving him an answer? This short time was enough for the news to spread to Lu Zhonglan and for him to quickly rush to the location. Lin Feng didn't understand Duan Tianlang's intentions. Lin Feng, however, could not determine whether the princess was still alive or not. He wanted to go and look for Duan Xinyi instead of wasting time here. After all, she had been kidnapped and he was responsible for protecting her. However, considering the number of arrows aiming at him and the incredibly strong soldiers surrounding him, rushing to save her would have been idiotic. His life was currently in danger. He slowly turned around and saw that the oil lamp would soon burn out. The ground started to shake. An incredible number of horses rushed towards the campsite. The tent was completely surrounded by soldiers in an instant. "Duan Tianlang, do you think that you can act as you please here?" At that moment, a voice spread through the atmosphere. Lu Zhonglan appeared in the air with his bow on his back. Behind him, the officer of the Qixia troops, Zhou Qixia, was closely following. He immediately moved next to Lin Feng and ignored everybody else. Lu Zhonglan, Lin Feng plotted against the princess and did not protect her. She is nowhere to be found. Why do you choose to side with him? What evil intentions are you harboring? Said Duan Tianlang. I don't care who kidnapped the princess, but since such a short time has passed, looking for the princess within the campsite would be the best solution rather than wasting time here. She would not have been able to leave the camp. However, you have brought all of your soldiers here and created a chaotic environment and spread rumors. How does that affect the morale for our army? You wouldn't be doing this on purpose to cause harm to Lin Feng. Lu Zhonglan's words surprised Lin Feng. As expected, Lu Zhonglan was very experienced and proved he clearly understood the most important aspects of the situation. Duan Tianlang was an aristocrat and the chief commander. How could he not understand what was most important in this situation? Duan Tianlang, order your troops to stand down, shouted Lu Zonglan while stretching his hand and breaking an arrow in front of him. He was furious. Duan Tianlang, order your troops to stand down, shouted Lu Zonglan while stretching his hand and breaking an arrow in front of him. He was furious. If the Mou country army had launched an attack, they were not prepared to fight, it would even lead to a crushing defeat. At that moment, he could just hope that the troops would stop fighting against each other and the army could focus on Mou country. Stand down. Lu Zonglan, you are a traitor and attempted to collaborate with someone who assassinated the princess. Even if I am not strong enough, I will fight you to the death, said Duan Tianlang in an ice-cold tone. Lu Zonglan had a cold sweat dripping down his back. Duan Tianlang was completely shameless, he was ready to let tens of thousands die. Lu Zonglan jumped up in the air. He shouted furiously, all the troops of the Shuayu country, stop fighting each other and fight against the real enemy, otherwise we will all be buried here. Whoosh! At that moment, a whistling sound spread through the air. An arrow was hurtling towards Lu Zonglan at full speed. Duan Tianlang, you traitor, shouted Lu Zonglan furiously. He raised his hand and disintegrated the arrow into powder. His body was descending while taking Lin Feng with him at the same time and he shouted, all the troops of Shuayu, listen to my orders. Retreat to the Duanren border. Lu Zonglan was well aware of the situation. The troops were already in total disorder. They would never be able to resist an enemy attacking them. Qi Xia troops, listen to the orders. Retreat to the Duanren border, shouted Jiu Qi Xia furiously. The horses started galloping in a mad retreat. They didn't continue fighting and immediately retreated to the Duanren border. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Horrifying whistling sounds filled the air. Lu Zonglan raised his head and looked at the sky, his face turned deathly pale as the blood drained from his face. In the sky, there was a cloud of arrows ready to rain destruction. There were so many arrows that the sky could no longer be seen. The area was completely covered with arrows. In a flash, Lu Zonglan noticed that the entire area had turned dark and the cloud of arrows was falling towards them. Loud mournful cries and horrible shrieks filled the atmosphere. That moment seemed like the doomsday for the Shuayu country. Lin Feng grabbed his sword and raised it in the air. It was dazzling to the eyes and resplendent. When the arrows came into contact with the sword, they were pulverized into dust. The arrows continued falling from the sky for a full 10 breaths of time. The sky was visible again, but at that moment, the tents of the Shuayu campsite were completely destroyed and countless corpses were lying down on the ground. Retreat! Retreat! The soldiers were going insane. Many people were shouting to retreat. If they retreated to Duanren border, there would still be some hope. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The sky turned black again. Arrows filled the sky and started to descend upon them again. As before, horrible shrieks endlessly spread throughout the camp. At that moment, horses were galloping at full speed which made the ground shake. It seemed like death was galloping towards the troops of Shuayu. The armored horses of Mou, after 2 arrow volleys, were already galloping towards them to launch an attack. Lin Feng looked at the ground and saw the blood of his dragon colt horse. Lin Feng grabbed his sword and didn't move backwards, instead he moved towards the armored horses of Mou. Die! When the soldiers on their armored horses saw that Lin Feng wasn't retreating, they rushed towards him with killing intent while raising their spears. Lin Feng's sword was quiet, dazzling and ice-cold. The cold and resplendent flow emitted by the sword seemed like it could cover the entire country. The cavalry which were charging towards him were suddenly cut into 2 pieces. The upper half was flying through the air and the lower half remained on horseback. Deadly sword. Lin Feng's expression was ice cold. Then, his expressionless and dark eyes could be seen. Lin Feng continued to kill the enemies which rushed towards him. The cavalry was being massacred. Lin Feng continued moving forwards, attacking large groups of enemies with his sword. 1 sword swing and a dozen enemies would die. But at that moment, Lin Feng was already completely surrounded by the enemy troops. They weren't moving towards him at full speed anymore in small groups. They all raised their spears towards him. Immediately after, they all charged towards Lin Feng. If they all attacked him, Lin Feng would certainly die. The terrifying force emanating from Lin Feng's deadly sword was enveloping the enemies, causing them all to feel an immense fear. They all had a cold sweat running down their backs. Lonely sword. Lin Feng's body spun at full speed as he attacked enemies in every direction. Every person touched by his sword would meet an incredibly violent death. A single attack was enough to kill dozens of soldiers where they stood. While meeting his enemies face to face, a brave and courageous cultivator would always win. Lin Feng jumped into the air and landed on a horse. He released a cold, sharp energy into the atmosphere. In the blink of an eye, the horse quickly became docile. Lin Feng cut off its reins and galloped forward at full speed. His sword was emitting a radiant glow. A single strike would mean death. Lin Feng was a single-mounted soldier cutting his way through the enemy army like an invincible war god. Duanren border was only about 5 kilometers away from where the soldiers were stationed. Even though it was a very short distance, the landscape had turned into a bloody hell. There were countless corpses which now decorated the landscape. There were 3,000 archers situated above the Duanren border. They were all the most elite archers. Each time they saw the MOU troops approach, they filled the sky with their arrows. The passage leading to the Duanren border was narrow and could only accommodate a few people. Even if they tried to hide from the arrows, they would not have anywhere to hide. This is why the MOU troops didn't dare enter. They did not know how to avoid the arrows raining down on them. Another reason why the MOU troops would not enter the narrow passage is that there was a man blocking the passageway. If that man guards the pass, 10,000 soldiers cannot get through. That man was Lu Zhonglan, the divine arrow. The Shuiyu troops could only stay behind him or climb on up the cliffs of the Duanren border, waiting for the enemy. If the MOU troops arrived, Lu Zhonglan would inevitably kill them. Lu Zhonglan's arrows never missed its target, and his arrows were always deadly. While looking at the Shuiyu troops being massacred on the horizon, Lu Zhonglan had the feeling that his heart was being stabbed. Lin Feng arrived in front of Lu Zhonglan on his new horse. He immediately got down and stood to Lu Zhonglan's side. He was calmly looking at the countless deaths on the horizon. These troops were all dying because of Duan Tianlang's grudge against Lin Feng. Duan Tianlang. Lin Feng felt an uncontrollable killing intent towards Duan Tianlang. A few 100,000 lives would be lost. What did that mean to Duan Tianlang? Nothing. Why did Duan Tianlang act in such a way? Because he had caused such a large distraction within the encampment and refused to stop the fight, he had given the MOU country an opportunity to attack. Besides, it seemed like MOU knew about chaos and came to seize that opportunity. Enemies were coming in larger amounts, but each time they were killed by Lu Zhonglan at the entrance of Duanren border. From the top of the hills, it was easy to kill the approaching enemies while remaining safe. In the distance, it seemed like the MOU troops had already slaughtered the surplus of Shuiyu troops. Qixia horses were galloping towards the Duanren border. However, as the Qixia armored horses neared the Duanren border, they all stopped. The Duanren border was the last stop before the Shuiyu country. It was the last checkpoint where the Shuiyu country could protect themselves. The MOU country knew this perfectly well. While standing on the hills of Duanren border, they could easily kill the approaching enemies. From the top, not only could they easily kill people, but they would also be able to let the Qixia troops safely pass. When using a bow from a high vantage point, a single person could kill 10 people. Killing 100 enemies was even normal. The MOU troops were not going to foolishly rush towards the Duanren border. There were too many people that had climbed to the top of the cliffs. If they wanted to go through, the MOU troops would have to sacrifice troops by the 10,000s, which would be a great loss. Lu Zhonglan looked at the huge MOU army while shaking in anger. They were suffering a crushing defeat. That battle was all about slaughtering the Shuiyu army. The Shuiyu army couldn't compete with the MOU army any longer. A moment before, when he had returned to Duanren border, There only 100,000 soldiers left, and amongst them, many were injured. Almost all their troops had been killed during that battle. During the inner chaos, the MOU troops had moved rapidly, leaving them no chance to resist. All they could do was run away. How could they resist to an army composed of 500,000 attacking when they were unprepared? An incredible amount of people had already been killed. At that moment, in front of the troops that had stopped, a silhouette slowly appeared. It was a young man. His face looked pale, but his two eyes looked sharp and cruel, making people want to prostrate themselves before him. This person was the enemy prince. "General Divine Arrow," said the young man. His voice was low, but it pierced through Lu Zhonglan and the others. "Mo Jia," said Lu Zhonglan in an ice-cold tone while looking at that young man. "General Divine Arrow, you have been protecting the Duanren border for many years. That is a great military accomplishment, and you are a legendary figure. Nobody has ever been able to pass through the Duanren border. I, Mo Jia, have always admired you for that. I am very happy to meet you today," said Mo Jia while calmly sitting on his horse and looking towards Lu Zhonglan, slightly bowing in respect. He respected the general of Shuiyu. "General Divine Arrow, you have been protecting the Duanren border for many years. That is a great military accomplishment, and you are a legendary figure. Nobody has ever been able to pass through the Duanren border. I, Mo Jia, have always admired you for that. I am very happy to meet you today," said Mo Jia while calmly sitting on his horse and looking towards Lu Zhonglan, slightly bowing in respect. He respected the general of Shuiyu. The general of a massacred army has no need for military accomplishments. Lu Zhonglan sounded saddened. They had already lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and it was his fault. His heart was still bleeding over his mistake. "What happened is not your fault. If you decided to come over to my MOU country, I, Mo Jia, would welcome you and even grant you with the status of a commander," said Mo Jia in an extremely polite tone. Even though he had a high status, he was indeed a prince, there wasn't the slightest bit of arrogance in his voice. He even bowed in front of Lu Zhonglan. Wasn't this a major event? A victory is a victory, a defeat is a defeat. "What is the point in speaking about it?" said Lu Zhonglan while shaking his head. "Thank you for your kindness, but I refuse. I will show you somebody and you will understand," said Mo Jia while waving his hand. Someone next to him moved, and then a few silhouettes appeared. Amongst them was a beautiful young woman who was trapped by a vine. She was brought to the front of others. Princess. Lin Feng and Lu Zhonglan were completely astonished, especially Lin Feng. A thought flashed through Lin Feng's mind. Was she a hostage? How could this happen? How could the princess be in Mo Jia's hands? Could it be that the assassin who captured the princess wasn't Duan Tianlang but people under Mo Jia's control? But why had he been ambushed by soldiers of Duan Tianlang, who wanted to kill him? Lin Feng had no idea what was happening. At that moment, Mo Jia looked at Lin Feng, smiled and said, "Your name is Lin Feng, right?" Lin Feng was stupefied when he heard Mo Jia. Mo Jia slowly started speaking. "In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. The young man's hair turns white, he is filled with sorrow. The humiliation of Duanren. When the officials hate, they destroy. On the back of the armored horses, going to the mountains armed with flowers. With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. Clearing from the beginning until the end, the mountains and lakes, moving towards the heavens." Mo Jia's voice was solemn and respectful. His voice was filled with ardor and lofty sentiments. Lu Zhonglan and Lin Feng were stupefied. Those who can sing with such spirit. "Lin Feng, if you are willing to come and join MOU, I will welcome you as well. If you wish, we could even become sworn brothers." Welcome him and become sworn brothers. The Prince of Mo surprisingly attached great importance to Lin Feng. If you accept my offer, I will, of course, not harm the princess. She will even become your wife, continued Mo Jia while smiling. From Lin Feng's expression, Mo Jia had understood that Lin Feng cared about the princess's safety. Lu Zhonglan looked at Lin Feng. He remembered that was the song which Lin Feng had sung. Surprisingly, Mo Jia knew about it as well. Even though they both remained brave, they were doomed. The Mou troops were soon going to enter Duanren border and kill them all. Are you the one who sent the assassins to kidnap the princess? Asked Lin Feng. You don't need to doubt anything. I will show you, and you will understand, said Mo Jia while clapping his hands. Someone moved to his side on horseback, raised his head and took off his helmet. When the face appeared, Lin Feng's expression turned ice cold. It's you, said Lin Feng, whose eyes revealed clear killing intent. It was the high-ranking soldier who had blocked Lin Feng's path. He was the one who plotted against the princess. You understand now. I knew everything about your army, and even knew about the tensions which existed between you and Duan Tianlang, said Mo Jia indifferently. He sounded very calm. Lin Feng looked at Mo Jia with a cold look and then slowly said, You were able to create chaos amongst our army using such a tactic. It is indeed a very good method. You are clearly a fierce and ambitious person. Lin Feng wasn't using a polite tone. Even though there was tension within their army, managing to create such chaos, that was a flawless attack. The game of war was a deadly one. It was filled with people who would be stepped on like insects. Falling into someone's trap could be fatal. One careless move and the whole game is lost. They had been careless once and gave Mo Jia a great opportunity. That had led to the downfall of their army. If you and the general come to my country, you will both be heroes, continued Mo Jia. He really wanted them to join him. Lin Feng and Lu Zhonglan were however both shaking their heads. Mo Jia, will welcome both of you at any time. Mo Jia then turned his head around and said indifferently, Set up an encampment 2 kilometers from here. When he finished talking, his army began to move. For them, orders must be followed. Mo Jia was like their god. Shuiyu army, listen to my words, I want you to withdraw from the Duanren border. In 3 days, if you haven't followed my instructions, I will behead the princess. Said Mo Jia in a loud voice. The whole army was shaking after hearing this. Surprisingly, he wanted them to leave the Duanren border or he would kill the princess. During these 3 days, I will not harm your precious princess. You have 3 days to think carefully, said Mo Jia. Immediately after, the ground shook and only a cloud of dust remained as they left. Only the Shuiyu army was left and they were all in speechless despair. There was no possibility of discussing terms with Mo Jia. Mo Jia had given his terms and there was no margin for error. He left as soon as he finished speaking. While looking at Duan Xianyi leaving, Lin Feng's heart was laden with grief. Suddenly, he started feeling extremely guilty for what happened. If he was stronger, the princess wouldn't have been kidnapped. Duan Tianlang would also have had no reason to accuse him and trigger a civil war amongst their 2 armies. The blood of hundreds of thousands of soldiers would not have been spilled. Of course, Lin Feng knew that he could not change the past. He was already endlessly furious. He couldn't change anything that happened. Let's go back to Duanren city, said Lu Zhonglan while turning around and leaving. While looking at Lu Zhonglan's silhouette, Lin Feng was shaking in anger. He knew that Lu Zhonglan was suffering more than anyone else. All the soldiers who died were like his brothers. At that moment, a few silhouettes rushed towards Lu Zhonglan and stopped in front of him. Lu Zhonglan, you triggered a war amongst the Shuiyu armies which led to the deaths of so many soldiers, even the princess was kidnapped. What should your punishment be? Shouted Duan Tianlang, who rushed towards Lu Zhonglan. Lin Feng narrowed his eyes. That guy was no better than a beast. His subordinate had been acting as an insider to capture the princess. It was Duan Tianlang who didn't want to give up the fight and wanted to harm Lin Feng no matter what. It was because of him that the situation became so chaotic and he refused to give up even as the MOU troops were launching an assault. At that moment, he was still blaming Lu Zhonglan. What a despicable and shameless person. Lu Zhonglan, you killed hundreds of thousands of troops. That's a crime that can only be settled with your death, said Duan Tianlang. Lin Feng's face became ice cold. Lu Zhonglan had been too lenient and was being treated unfairly. With their temperaments, life and death were really at stake. Duan Tianlang, I really admire you for still having the audacity to talk in such a way here. Lin Feng couldn't help but speak. He then said coldly, a real traitor to your country, using your power and authority allow the princess to get kidnapped while you avenge personal grudges. Your desire to kill me didn't only cause the princess to get captured, but you refused to stand down when the enemy bugles could be heard and continued to cause chaos within the army. When the MOU troops arrived, you were still thinking about your own selfish interests, which led to the loss of a huge number of troops. You came from the imperial city with your troops and your son, but when the enemy arrived, you were fastest people to escape with your tails between your legs. Amongst the soldiers who died, many of them were under your control, and surprisingly you still have the audacity to point your finger at Lu Zhonglan. If I were you, I would have died of shame a long time ago. I really admire you, as the chief commander, being able to do all of this without being ashamed is truly admirable. Lin Feng's words were extremely cold. The army soldiers were surprised and looked towards Duan Tianlang. He had a hideous expression on his face. Lin Feng, don't forget that you're the princess' personal guard. The princess disappeared, you will not be able to escape your punishment. Duan Tianlang, don't forget that you are the chief commander and the princess was kidnapped within your encampment and by your subordinate. I will not be able to escape my punishment. What do you even mean by that? Lin Feng replied aggressively. We will see who will die and who will live, replied Duan Tianlang with an evil smile on his face. He then turned around and abruptly left. You should kill me as long as you have the opportunity, because if you let me live, that cowardly mutt that you call a son will die by my hands and then you will be next, said Lin Feng while looking at Duan Tianlang's silhouette leaving. Lin Feng's voice was like that of an evil demon. Lin Feng's words came from the hatred within the bottom of his heart. If, in the future, he was allowed to grow strong, he would definitely kill Duan Tianlang and his son, without hesitation. Duan Tianlang heard Lin Feng. He stopped for a second and then immediately continued walking. Lin Feng really planned to kill Duan Tianlang and his son. If they didn't die, he wouldn't be able to live in peace. On the top of the tower above the city gate was Lu Zhonglan and behind him were 4 officers, Lin Feng and Lu Fei. On the top of the tower above the city gate was Lu Zhonglan and behind him were 4 officers, Lin Feng and Lu Fei. Lu Zhonglan had been standing there for a few hours already. He remained motionless while the others remained silent. They all understood the pain Lu Zhonglan was feeling in his heart. Over 100,000 people, their lives, their families, their future had vanished in an instant. This was the truth of war. It was the sad truth. Nobody could predict what was going to happen. Such dramatic events hadn't taken place in over 10 years. Besides, Lu Zhonglan had never lost any of his battles in the past, but at that moment, he had lost and his army was massacred. Lu Zhonglan took a deep breath. He then slowly turned around. At that moment, everybody inside the city was already packing and ready to leave Duanren city. The MOU country was putting pressure on them by using the princess life. They wouldn't be able to defend the Duanren border. If they lost the Duanren border, Duanren city would become a very dangerous place. A 500,000 strong army would easily be able to conquer Duanren city. They were not a simple military force, a large number had broken through to the Ling Qi layer. In one jump, they could scale the gate of Duanren city. From there they could rain down arrows and annihilate everything inside. Even though Duanren city is vast, it could only be considered a small town. It has a population of 550,000 civilians. The civilians must leave the city, even though for many of them it is their place of birth. As a general, I cannot get them involved, said Lu Zhonglan while sighing. As in any war, the outcome is never certain, you can win or you can lose. The only thing in your control is how you deal with the situation, General, said Lin Feng while shaking his head. What do you expect me to do? I don't understand, asked Lu Zhonglan, who didn't understand. Lin Feng turned around, looked at Lu Zhong. He then said in a calm and solemn tone, I need wood. Wood? Lu Zhonglan stared blankly at Lin Feng. He was dumbfounded. Lin Feng spoke again, Uncle Lu, I hope that you can satisfy my request this time. After remaining silent for a moment, Lu Zhong nodded in a serious way and said, all right. Officers, I hope you can help me as well, said Lin Feng while looking at Zhou Qixia and the others. They all slightly nodded, even though they didn't know what Lin Feng actually really meant to do. At that moment, in the city, horses were neighing and many people were getting ready to leave. Amongst these people, many of them were from the Holy Courtyard of Shuayu and the Celestial Academy. They all looked deathly pale. They had hoped to gain military exploits, but it was impossible for them. That place was too dangerous. They had to go back to the Imperial City, where it was safe. This battle had nothing to do with them. Even the young men who had come with Duan Tianlang were leaving as well. Lu Zhonglan, shouted Duan Tianlang extremely loudly. Lu Zhonglan, you caused our own army fight against each other and the princess was captured because of it. You then caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their homes. I will report all of this to His Majesty and he will decide himself on how to punish you for your crimes, shouted Duan Tianlang as he moved into the distance. He made it sound like Lu Zhonglan was guilty for everything and never took any of the responsibility. Lin Feng's heart grew extremely cold. The princess had been kidnapped at Duan Tianlang's encampment, but he was making out that it had nothing to do with him. Besides, he was running back to the Imperial City. The princess' life suddenly meant nothing to him any longer. Lin Feng also understood that Duan Tianlang wanted to go to the Imperial City to remove all responsibility from himself and shift the blame onto Lu Zhonglan. Lu Zhonglan didn't pay attention to Duan Tianlang. He was worthless. What Lu Zhonglan was regretting the most was that he let Duan Tianlang join them in the first place. He should have known better than to think Duan Tianlang would be of any actual use on the battlefield. With the smile of victory on his face, Duan Tianlang, the chief commander, was escaping from Duanren City with his army. Lu Zhonglan would inevitably stay there and fight Mou, resulting in his death. This battle would be even worse for them, no one would be able to escape uninjured. When the right moment came, Duan Tianlang would report Lu Zhonglan's crimes to His Majesty. The third day, the deadline was slowly arriving. Rumbling noises filled the atmosphere. Mou soldiers on their horses were arriving outside of Duanren border. Their army stretched across the landscape as far as the eye could see. But at that moment, on the hills of Duanren border, there was nobody at all. Mo Jia moved towards the front line on his horse. He looked at the empty mountains and looked like he was lost in thought. Could it be that the troops of Shuayu had really withdrawn and were offering the Duanren border to the Mou country? Bring the princess to the front, said Mo Jia indifferently. Duan Xinyi was on a horseback and was wearing armor. Besides, she wasn't chained or restrained in any way. Just like Mo Jia said, they hadn't harmed the princess at all. First row of black guards, go secure the cliffs of the Duanren border and do a thorough inspection, said Mo Jia. In a flash, a row of black guards galloped towards the top of Duanren border. If Mo Jia gave them an order, they obeyed it even if it cost them their life. This group of black guards were extremely skillful. If there was nobody to guard Duanren border, it was easy for them to reach the top. They were all extremely skillful and careful to make no noise. All of them had been selected as the best amongst Qixia troops. They were all the best of the best from the most elite units within the army. They were all at least sergeants and the weakest of them had reached the third Ling Qi layer. They were not only doing this at one location on the city walls. Many of them were all attacking from a large number of places and taking over the city wall. The strongest of them were moving into Duanren city, killing the night guards and throwing the corpses over the wall to provide the others with armor. It was already late into the night, so everything was done under the cover of darkness and with complete silence. Nobody had been alarmed by these actions. At that moment, a group of black guards armed with spears appeared in Duanren city. They looked majestic and imposing. Amongst them was a young man whose face looked incredibly delicate. It was Lin Feng. These people didn't belong to Mou country at all. They were all from Shuiyu. Because the Mou troops had come in and immediately set up camp, they weren't very strict with fortifying their position. Therefore, Lin Feng could easily move to every corner of the city. A short moment after, Lin Feng and the others arrived at a room and immediately entered. "Stop!" Someone suddenly cried. Two guards were preventing Lin Feng and the others from going inside. They then said, "Some people are already staying inside." "I know," said Lin Feng while continuing to walk forwards. These two guards were astonished. Immediately after, a resplendent and bright glow appeared and a light green dagger cut the throats of the two guards. They then softly fell down onto the floor. Lin Feng's silhouette flickered and he immediately moved towards the room. The door of the room opened itself, emitting a squeaking sound. The light green dagger started to glow again and quickly slit the throat of the man who just opened the door. His mouth was covered as he slumped down as to stop him making any sounds. "There is another person inside," said Lin Feng. Immediately after, they entered the room. Inside the room, there was a great deal of wood. This was part of their plan. The Shuiyu troops were very familiar with it. They knew exactly where everything was placed. The same thing was happening at multiple locations within Duanren city. Finally, a sound filled the atmosphere, breaking the silence and calling the troops to attention. When Lin Feng heard the sound, he obviously knew that they were out of time. He quickly entered into another room and as he left, flames appeared behind him. There were flames everywhere, fire was completely covering Duanren city. Lin Feng seemed pensive while looking at the flames. In his previous life, he used to use fire to cook delicacies. In this life, he was using fire to cook people alive. Of course, he knew that this amount of fire wouldn't be sufficient. He needed to turn it into a rampaging fire which engulfed the entire city. All around the outside of Duanren city, the Qixia troops were watching the flames as they engulfed the city. After the order was given, they all urged their horses on and galloped towards Duanren city at full speed. All around the outside of Duanren city, the Qixia troops were watching the flames as they engulfed the city. After the order was given, they all urged their horses on and galloped towards Duanren city at full speed. In the blink of an eye, the Qixia troops arrived in front of Duanren city with their bows in hand. The flames were already soaring higher and higher. Amongst the Qixia troops, all of them had prepared for this moment beforehand. The heads of their arrows were already alight with raging fire and immediately after that, they released their arrows from their bows and a fiery rain of arrows fell upon the city. What seemed like an endless rain of burning arrows continued to rain down on the city. The scene was magnificent and tragic. Immediately after, the Mou troops looked at the rain of burning arrows filling the sky above them. They were astonished. It seemed like the heavens were punishing them. After the Qixia troops shot the first volley of arrows, they then started to circle the city releasing volley after volley of fiery death. The scene was so bright that it seemed like the sun had risen early. Shortly after, the entire city of Duanren was a sea of flames. At that moment, chaos and disorder struck the Mou troops. That sudden attack had surprised them. They had fallen into a fire trap. At the same time, inside the city, Lin Feng and the elite soldiers were assassinating the higher-ranking commanders who could relay orders to stop the chaos. If they had been prepared and ready to fight, it would have been difficult. However, using these burning arrows it was possible to injure or kill cultivators of the third Ling Qi layer and even the elites of higher cultivation levels. Of course, it was very difficult to injure the stronger cultivators, but it was enough to injure and kill the troops around them. That had been enough to create chaos amongst the MOU troops. That blazing fire made the MOU troops unable to return to formation and organize their army. It was even more chaotic amongst their horses. At that moment, Mo Jia was inside his room getting dressed. A burning arrow shot past him. He was calm yet looked pensive. Burning the entire city with flaming arrows, Lu Zhonglan really deserves his nickname, the Divine Arrow, said Mo Jia while sounding indifferent. Immediately after, he said, I order all the troops to move back towards the northern gate. Don't extinguish the fire and don't chase those who have entered the city. Just move back to the northern gate and get prepared to welcome them. When Mo Jia finished talking, his order was relayed to all their troops throughout the burning city. At that moment, all the MOU troops had stopped trying to extinguish the fire and stopped fighting against the infiltrators. They were all moving towards the northern gate of the city. Inside the city, a soldier was killed in the blink of an eye. At the same time, Mo Jia's order had been relayed to all of the troops, so they no longer looked for Lin Feng or tried to stop him. Lin Feng could also now ignore them and started to move towards the north gate. The soldiers who had been chasing Lin Feng were not the only ones to obey the order and stop fighting. All the army without exception followed orders. Nobody dared to call the order into question. They hadn't felt the slightest bit of hesitation. Mo Jia has such a strong influence on his troops, thought Lin Feng when he saw that scene. The MOU country had the goal to make Mo Jia their national symbol, to make them worship him as a god amongst men. Mo Jia obviously enjoyed such a prestigious reputation in MOU. There was no one who doubted his strength and talent. Staying in such a chaotic situation and being unable to act rationally could have led to heavy losses for their army. Gathering the troops together in one place was the best reaction to counter the enemy's strategy. It would enable them to concentrate their strength and break free from the encirclement. Now, all we have to do is rely on Uncle Lu, thought Lin Feng. Immediately after, he sheathed his sword and ran like mad through the flames. He was running shoulder to shoulder with the other troops towards the northern gate. At that moment, even though the MOU troops were trying to gather all together, chaos was still present amongst them. Lin Feng was wearing MOU armor, so there was no chance that anybody would find out who he was unless he attacked them. Besides, it was impossible for hundreds of thousands of troops to know every single face within the army. At the northern gate, there was an unceasing rain of arrows falling from the sky. The strong cultivators of the MOU country had gathered there. Some of them could control ice, snow and water. Therefore, they could easily extinguish the fire. In the entire city of Duanren, the northern gate was the safest place, but it was also covered in darkness. But in a short time, about 100,000 troops had already gathered there, and the number of people seemed to be increasing over time. The crowd was extremely silent. They could distinctly hear the chaos in the distance as well as the people's steps near them. At that moment, Mo Jia was standing in front of the crowd looking towards the city gate and said while sounding indifferent, "Open the gate." "Open the gate," shouted a high-ranking soldier. While the gate was being opened, a rumbling noises spread through the air. 5,000 elite cavalry, open the way and secure the path 2 kilometers ahead, said Mo Jia. Some armored cavalry gathered, they urged on their horses and moved towards the exit of the city. In the middle of the night, they couldn't see a great deal, so they also couldn't see if they were running into an ambush. However, even in the case of an ambush, it was impossible for the entire army to get killed. In the middle of the crowd, Lin Feng looked at the soldiers who were remaining calm. Mo Jia was truly terrifying. Even at that moment, nobody was calling his orders in question. He was a true leader. Even at a moment when the skies seemed to be raining death down onto them, they remained calm and fearless. If the leader didn't remain calm, could his army remain calm? With such a huge number of people, it was hard to restore calmness to the army. The northern city gate was far from the Duanren border. Mo Jia was trying to think as if he was Lu Zhonglan, and if he had been Lu Zhonglan, he would have set an ambush between Duanren city and the Duanren border, but that was the western city gate. That's why Mo Jia had chosen the northern gate and not the western gate. He did not want to fall into a trap and get killed. The 5,000 cavalry were progressing through the dark. Everything was perfectly calm and tranquil. The only sound was that of their horse hoofs hitting the ground. At that moment, a few horses neighed loudly. Suddenly there was the feeling that the ground was unsteady beneath their feet. The cavalry and their horses fell down in a deep pit. When the cavalry behind them heard this, they rushed over thinking it was an enemy attack and fell into the pit. The situation was chaotic. Those who had just fallen into the pit wanted to move, but then they were stopped by the falling soldiers and horses which fell onto them. The situation was chaotic. Arrows started to fill the air emitting whistling sounds as they pierced through the darkness. Horrible shrieks unceasingly came from the direction in the elite cavalry unit had entered the darkness to clear the way. The faces of the troops still inside the city turned deathly pale when they heard the horrible shrieks. Their comrades had probably died in an ambush. "Let's move, let's go to the western gate," said Mo Jia while remaining calm. Immediately after, all his troops moved towards the western gate. Even though those who had an ice spirit were opening the way, they were still suffering losses as people died as they were burnt to death or struck by the rain of fiery arrows falling from the sky. However, the number of troops gathered at the western gate hadn't decreased. On the contrary, there were even more than at the northern gate because there were still parts of the army joining the main force which had not yet arrived. At that moment, there were more than 200,000 soldiers that gathered at the western city gate. But Mo Jia felt cold in his heart. Setting the city on fire was an extremely cruel method. Mo Jia couldn't help but appreciate the strategy. That tactic was unprecedented in history of the continent and it proved to be extremely efficient. It seemed like his 500,000-strong army were prisoners inside the city they had just captured. "Open the gate, 3,000 elite cavalry, go and clear a path to the Duanren border," said Mo Jia while still remaining indifferent. This time, he didn't send 5,000 but 3,000 troops. As before, these troops opened the gate and left without hesitation. However, they ran straight into an ambush and Lu Zhonglan could be seen with his troops on the horizon. The MOU troops understood that Mo Jia had seen that there was a high possibility of it being a trap. Going to the western city gate was actually falling deeper into their trap. A moment before, outside of the northern gate there might not have been enough traps to stop the entire army, there may have only been a single trap. However, they had fallen right into the enemy's hands. "General Lu Zhonglan, you are extremely smart. I am now thoroughly convinced," said Mo Jia while looking at Lu Zhonglan in a cold and detached way. At that moment, the Shuayu troops were still firing arrows. There was an endless rain of fire flying through the sky. Because the tower blocked their sight, the MOU troops couldn't see how many people were waiting outside. They could only see an endless stream of fire on the horizon. "I am not the one who organized this strategy," said Lu Zhonglan coldly while slowly raising his hand. "General, if it was not you, who was it?" asked Mo Jia stupefied. "Lin Feng." Lu Zhonglan then waved his hand down. At that moment, a huge volley of arrows turned into a storm that ravaged the 200,000 of MOU troops. Under that storm of burning arrows, a huge number of troops were killed without the chance to fight back. At the same time, the arrows set the corpses and the ground on fire, which created a sea of fire which spread and burned even more people alive. When Mo Jia saw that the Shuayu troops were about to shoot another volley of arrows, he already knew that it was impossible for him to escape. "Die!" shouted Mo Jia. The MOU army turned into a fearless war machine and moved towards the city gate to fight the arrows head-on. At that moment, everybody was cursing a single name, Lin Feng. After that battle, Lin Feng would be famous within Shuayu as well as in MOU. Chaos. Chaos. The troops from both countries were engaged in a fearsome battle. The battlefield was covered with the corpses of soldiers. The MOU troops had rushed from the city to fight against the Shuayu troops. The MOU troops constituted a powerful army and their spears glowed through the dark night with fearsome killing. The broken weapons on the ground emitted quiet metallic clangs from their movements. On both sides of the city, the Qixia troops gathered into one location on the battlefield. They then fired another volley of arrows towards the MOU army. The fire was still raging and the heat from the fire was growing more intense with every passing moment. The MOU troops didn't know how to react. At the same time, amongst the MOU troops, a sword glowed with a radiant light and released a terrifying deadly chi. The sword slashed in a circle at full speed which created a terrifying pressure which killed hundreds of soldiers. It was Lin Feng. After that sword attack, the other Qi Xia elites who had infiltrated the enemy's army also started to mercilessly slaughter the unguarded troops around them. It created chaos throughout the enemy army. However, they continued to follow orders and did not attach a great importance to their own lives. Fighting at that moment was an army of 250,000 MOU troops while the Shuiyu troops were composed of less than 100,000 troops. MOU, while suffering heavy losses within the city, still held the advantage in numbers. However, sooner or later, the other Shuiyu troops would have a direct confrontation with the enemy army. They just had to wait until the MOU troops moved closer. In the time it would take for the MOU army to reach them, how many arrows could they fire? But they had already killed half of the MOU army and had caused chaos within the army. Considering the fact that they still had the Qi Xia troops ready to fight and Lin Feng's group of elites inside the enemy army causing chaos, it was safe to say that they had complete control over the situation. When fighting the enemies in a head-on battle, who would have the bravest soldiers? Which side would win? Lin Feng was moving through the army. Anyone who tried to block Lin Feng turned into another corpse on the ground. Lin Feng wasn't alone though, he was surrounded by the group of elites accompanying him. The battle between MOU and Shuiyu was a battle of victory or death. Retreating wasn't an option. Lin Feng had no choice. He needed to go and save Princess Duan Xinyi. Duan Xianyi had been kidnapped while he was protecting her. If something happened to her, Lin Feng would not only suffer a death sentence but it was also mean punishment for Lu Qinlan. Lin Feng had to rescue Duan Xinyi. To Lin Feng's left, a sword was also unceasingly glowing and every time it moved someone was killed, making its owner look like a reaper of death. His sword was moving much faster than that of Lin Feng's sword. Each of its blows were not only faster but also much more powerful. The deadly chi it was releasing was several times heavier than that released by Lin Feng. It was clear that the owner of this sword had been through countless bloodbaths. Lin Feng turned around and saw the young man cutting down his enemies and was shocked. Currently the young man's face was not like that of a beautiful girl. At that moment, he looked ice-cold and emotionless. He was wearing pure white robes, but he looked like a death god. It was obviously Wen Ao Shui. No wonder he was so respected and revered at the Celestial Academy. Wen Ao Shui's beautiful eyes were as sharp as the god of death's sword. On the horizon, a beautiful light started to fill the sky. Day was starting to break. Outside of Duanren City, the sea of broken weapons had also turned into a sea of blood and corpses. These corpses were still fresh and blood continued to pour from the bodies to create a sea of blood. Lin Feng rushed forwards and with a single deadly sword he killed a dozen soldiers in his path. However, Lin Feng wasn't excited at all. He looked at all the countless corpses covering the battlefield. His heart felt saddened. This was war and their lives didn't matter much on the battlefield, but to someone they mattered. A rumble spread through the atmosphere and was coming from a distant place on the horizon. It was a crash of lightning as if the heavens were descending with their wrath. The entire crowd couldn't help but shiver from head to toe. Everybody slowly raised their head and looked to the horizon. On the horizon where the sun had started to rise there was now a sea of black clouds. It seemed like a human shape had appeared within them, but it quickly disappeared. Darkness filled the battlefield once again as the sky was covered by these clouds. It looked like a completely black creature who looked down on humans with disdain from the sky. How terrifying, thought Lin Feng. When he saw the sea of black clouds appear in the sky, his heart started pounding. A group of barbarians dared to fight against my MOU. A silhouette appeared in the middle of the sea of black clouds. Immediately after, the palm of his hand thrust out and a black seal appeared on the ground. The seal was the shape of a castle. There was a thick black deadly chi within which pounded into the ground and crushed anything in its way. The ground was violently shaking. The hearts of the Shuayu army were all trembling with fear. That attack had just killed 1,000 Shuayu soldiers. One attack was enough to claim 1,000 lives. These Shuayu soldiers could barely see it coming before they had been crushed, without even the time to give a horrible shriek. A gigantic black crater appeared in the ground from the attack. All the corpses of the Shuayu troops had disappeared into that blackness. Besides, those who were near the attack, men and horses, were sent hurtling away. The faces of Shuayu army turned deathly pale. What kind of cultivator was that? Facing such a strong cultivator, they had lost all their courage to fight. Everybody had stopped moving. The Shuayu army had come to a halt. The Mou army had stopped too. They had all raised their heads and were blankly staring at that black silhouette in the sky. A short moment after, the Mou troops gave a furious shout which made the ground shake. That was an extremely strong cultivator from Mou. Alone, he could annihilate an entire army. When Lin Feng heard that shout, his sword slightly trembled. There was no room for strategy. He couldn't bring about a radical change in this situation. In front of such a strong cultivator, who could influence the entire course of the war, there was nothing he could do. He raised his left hand. Lin Feng hated his own weakness. He was not strong enough to protect himself and was not strong enough to influence the continent. That black palm must have been genuine pure energy, and the cultivator must be at the Xian Qi layer. That pure energy was extremely brutal. A cultivator of the Xian Qi layer could rely on pure qi and pure energy. Such a person could control the sky and eliminate his enemies with powerful attacks. He was clearly at the Xian Qi layer, and Chu Zhanpeng would be like an ant to be crushed under this cultivator's shoes. Someone who could control the sky and attack from the heavens was at least at the peak of the Xian Qi layer. Rumors said that the strongest cultivators could fly in the sky and kill millions of people as they wished. Those rumors were all true. That was the world of cultivation. Strong cultivators could act as they pleased. Soldiers, emperors, rulers, as long as they were strong, they could destroy or save life as they saw fit. Lin Feng also wanted to reach that point with his cultivation. He also hoped that he would be able to fly amongst the clouds someday. He was making great efforts to make that dream come true, and he was unceasingly battling to gain enlightenment. His heart was filled with incredible ambitions and aspirations. He would grow to be as powerful as an unmovable mountain. But to reach such a cultivation level, how much determination, experience and training was required? Nobody knew. For example, the strong cultivator who was looking down on them from the clouds could easily destroy the army of Shuayu. Could it be that the Shuayu army was going to die? Lu Tsonglan, you've been resisting my army for a while now. I respect you. You are an outstanding person, therefore I will let you die with dignity. I will allow you to take your own life. The black silhouette in the sky was looking at Lu Tsonglan and sounded like a majestic deity. In front of him, even the highest-ranking generals meant nothing. Lu Tsonglan raised his head while looking calm and indifferent. He looked at that silhouette in the sky. He then looked at the Shuayu army. It looked like he was lamenting. During a war between two countries, the strongest cultivators are not allowed to get involved. That is one of the rules that all countries respect, but today you come and pressure my army. Have I tacitly consented? Lu Tsonglan's voice was filled with sorrow. Mou would respect the rule unless it really wanted to conquer Shuayu. At that moment, no matter if it was Mou or Shuayu, neither of them had the power to conquer the other. Therefore, that rule couldn't be broken. Of course, there was one exception: if one side accepted the behavior of the other side. I accept. When the Shuayu troops heard Lu Tsonglan, they were all filled with great sadness. Lin Feng was extremely saddened. The princess had been kidnapped, and Duan Tianlang had caused chaos within the army. Lu Tsonglan, at that moment, had agreed to take his own life. This war had caused chaos. Nobody knew what would happen from that point. Everybody was looking towards the sky at the black silhouette. They only saw that a cold smile had appeared on that black silhouette. He then said coldly, "Anyway, I will give you the time of 10 breaths. If you don't end your own life, then I will personally kill you. How could a real man accept death? I would rather die in a battle. Too bad that I've gotten my troops involved, said Lu Zonglan while raising his head and looking at that black silhouette in the sky. Dense battle energy started burning around his body. His body then flew into the air. He was determined to fight until the end. How could he humiliate himself with suicide? The entire Shuiyu army looked extremely saddened. This battle was unfair. Since you want to die, I will help you achieve your goal, said the black silhouette coldly. He gathered the pure energy around his body once again. It contained immense power. In a towering rage, I rest under the whistling sound of rain. Gazing into the distance, looking up to the heavens, I utter a long and loud cry. My chest feels painful. 30 soldiers now with the dust and earth, the moon and the clouds stretching as far as can see. Suddenly a song filled the entire battlefield with a harmonious melody. If Lu Zonglan dies today, Prince Emojia will be buried here as well. That voice was so light and powerful that there was no doubt to the truth contained within those words. The black silhouette had a respectful expression on his face, and he then looked into the distance and said, "Who dares to say such insane things?" Han Emo, did you think that the cultivators of Shuiyu were gone? Asked a voice which was growing nearer and nearer to that location. That person was quickly approaching from a great distance away. A short instant later, another silhouette appeared in the sky. There was a floating cloud of pure qi underneath that man. He was sitting cross-legged on the cloud of pure qi. He was just calmly playing the zither in front of him. Yan Yu Ping Sheng, if I had known I would have brought a raincoat. When Han Emo saw the person, he was astonished. Why had he shown up on the battlefield? With magnificent ideals in my mind yet starvation filling my stomach, I eat their flesh. To settle my thirst, I drink their blood. The middle-aged man was singing and playing the zither. His fingers drifted above the strings and a white pure qi emerged. In a flash, an ear-piercing sound spread through the air, and suddenly, 1,000 soldiers from Moyu died miserably under the power of his sound-based attack. While laughing and talking, he reduced the enemy to nothing, killing without spilling blood. Han Emo, if you kill my soldiers, I will kill your soldiers. In the same way, if you kill Lu Zonglan, I kill Emojia, said the middle-aged man coldly while looking at Han Emo. Even though he was killing people, he looked graceful while playing the zither and smiling. The crowd was astonished. He was another extremely strong cultivator. They couldn't stop him. One melody from his zither and he could instantly kill 1,000 people. When the Shuiyu troops saw this person, they looked enthusiastic. Their hearts were once again filled with hope. They had never heard Yan Yu Pingsheng's name, but they knew that if he could speak that way, it meant that he must be no weaker than the black silhouette. This was one of the elite cultivators of Shuiyu. At that moment, Lin Feng's heart was pounding as well. Yan Yu Pingsheng, that was his real name. Lin Feng knew that middle-aged man in the sky, but he wasn't the only one. At the Celestial Academy, there were indubitably many people who knew him as well. That person was Lin Feng's zither teacher who taught him to cleanse his heart. It was his teacher from the peach tree orchard. Lin Feng hadn't thought that he would see him on the battlefield. It made Lin Feng finally start to feel relieved. The man that helped him break through to a higher Ling Qi layer was also one of the experts of the country. He was a wise man and he moved at the speed of lightning. He strangely looked like Wen Ao Shui somehow. He also had a womanly beauty to him, and on the battlefield, he had the presence of a death god. His attacks cut down the enemy army in thousands. Yan Yu Pingsheng, whispered Lin Feng. He wouldn't forget his name. Maybe Yan Yu Pingsheng was even stronger than Long Ding, the vice principal. Han Emo was fixedly staring at Yan Yu Pingsheng. He remained silent for a moment and then said, Yan Yu Pingsheng, long time no see. Would you like to fight against me? If you want to fight, let's fight. Yan Yu Pingsheng sounded calm. He was so calm as if the rest of the world couldn't affect his feelings. Pure qi was condensing around Han Mo's body. He spun his right hand in the air and suddenly black pure energy appeared. Annihilation. Han Imo threw a punch through the air which created an incredible noise as it broke through the atmosphere. That pitch-black energy seemed like it wanted to cover the heavens and the earth with its seals. The attack was rushing straight towards Yan Yupingsheng. Yan Yupingsheng was calmly sitting on his white cloud of pure qi. His fingers moved over the strings of his zither and then an incredible bright light emerged and moved towards his opponent. Psh, 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 loud clashing sounds invaded the atmosphere. Immediately after, the resplendent and bright light pierced through that black energy. That incredible white light contained an amazing quantity of pure energy and it was moving straight towards Han Imo. However, the black energy was also continuing its way towards Yan Yupingsheng even though the attack had been greatly reduced in power. "Let's move to another place," shouted Han Imo while moving down through the air. "That's exactly what I had in mind," replied Yan Yupingsheng. His cloud of pure qi then vanished. Then the two silhouettes shot into the distance and moved far away from the armies. Finally, they disappeared from vision completely. Han Imo and Yan Yupingsheng were extremely strong. If they had stayed there, their attacks would have killed the spectators, which is not what Han Imo and Yan Yupingsheng wished. When all the troops saw the two silhouettes disappear in the horizon, they remained calm for a long time gazing into the distance. At such a level of strength, one person could affect the fate of an entire battle, they could destroy an entire army. They were extremely powerful. No wonder that the 9 countries decided to set a rule stipulating that such strong cultivators couldn't get involved in wars. They could slaughter an entire army with little effort. "Die!" shouted Lu Zhonglan in the air. He took his bow from his back and a golden spirit appeared behind him. His bow drew the attention of everyone. Lu Zhonglan then pulled back the string of his bow when golden arrow illusions appeared and immediately aimed at the MOU troops. He then released the bowstring and 7 golden lights rushed through the air. Dozens of people died from this single attack. "Die!" shouted the Shuiyu army. The ground started to shake again. A moment before, Han Imo had killed 1,000 people with a single palm strike. He had also tried to force Lu Zhonglan to commit suicide, which had profoundly affected the morale of the troops, but at that moment, Yan Yupingsheng had appeared and was fighting against Han Imo. He had come to save them. They still had hoped to be able to escape from death. He had lit the fire within their hearts once again. Blood was heavily flowing on the ground once again. Lin Feng was firmly holding his sword and unceasingly cutting down anyone in his path. A group of people was fighting alongside him. Wherever they went, blood flowed. The battlefield had no set area and the battle quickly grew to cover a larger area over time. There was absolutely no organization to this battle, it was only kill or getting killed. At that moment Lin Feng finally noticed a silhouette. It was a beautiful girl riding on a horse, Duan Xinyi. However, she was unable to move. Her body had been tied. Besides, she was surrounded by 8 of the elite cavalry soldiers. These 8 people were wearing majestic black armor, they were members of the Black Guards. Duan Xinyi saw Lin Feng. Her beautiful eyes looked like a warm autumn day. The expression in her eyes revealed that she couldn't wait to be saved by Lin Feng. Of course, these Black Guards had also noticed Lin Feng killing his way toward them, leaving nothing but blood and corpses behind him. Their facial expressions grew cold and evil. At that moment Lin Feng jumped forward and at the same time, a Black Guard also jumped towards him. Psh, the light emitted by Lin Feng's sword was dazzling. The Black Guard's hand moved. Immediately after, Lin Feng felt that a rapid river was rushing towards him. His sword was swaying in the midst of a raging storm of attacks. There was a noise like a wave crashing down on the atmosphere. When the energy they were releasing collided, Lin Feng was immediately blown backwards. He only saw that Black Guard had immediately landed back on his horse. He then looked at Lin Feng with a cold glare and then the 8 Black Guards urged their horses forward and left with the princess. How strong! These Black Guards are extremely strong. Lin Feng's pupils shrank. Even though there were only 8 of the Black Guards, they were much stronger than all the people that Lin Feng had killed previously. Lin Feng rushed forward while brandishing his sword, and immediately after, a soldier fell down from his horse. Lin Feng immediately jumped on the horse and galloped towards these 8 Black Guards at full speed. Duan Xinyi had to be saved even if it cost him his life. The wind was piercing through Lin Feng's eardrums. He was urging like mad on his horse, galloping at full speed. The wind was piercing through Lin Feng's eardrums. He was urging like mad on his horse, galloping at full speed. 2 silhouettes brandished their spears. They wanted to block Lin Feng, but they only saw his sword glow for an instant. In a flash, these 2 silhouettes fell dead onto the ground. That move hadn't affected Lin Feng's speed at all. Lin Feng was still chasing the princess while being completely surrounded by a fierce battlefield with people dying all around him. Lin Feng was galloping at full speed. He was almost out of the Duanren border. These 9 silhouettes, without the slightest bit of hesitation, entered the passageway that led out of the Duanren border. Lin Feng followed them without hesitation. Even though the Duanren border was already under the control of Mou, Lin Feng was also wearing the armor of a Mou soldier, which made him look like he was one of them. Therefore, nobody was going to attack Lin Feng. Lin Feng, as well as the group following him, also passed through the passageway of the Duanren border smoothly. Passing through the passage didn't slow them down at all. Once they exited the passage, they could see corpses as far as their eyes could possibly see. These dead bodies lying on the ground were all of the Shuiyu troops. What fast horses! Even though Lin Feng's horse was galloping at full speed, he couldn't catch up with the Black Guards at all. Even though they were guided by the horse which Duan Xinyi was riding, these 9 brown horses were much faster than the ordinary horses Mou soldiers used. However, Lin Feng didn't intend to give up, and he was just as determined as before. They continued to chase them for a few hours. Lin Feng didn't know how much distance he had already covered. Once in a while, he could see smoke in the distance. At that moment, Lin Feng had already crossed the border that Shuiyu and Mou shared. At that moment, he was in the Mou country. At that moment, there was foam around the mouth of the horse which Lin Feng was riding, and it was covered with sweat. It looked exhausted. That horse had incredible strength and agility, but at that moment, it was already unable to continue. A horse that quick and agile was already exhausted. Lin Feng could already sense that he was near his enemies. The silhouettes he had been chasing were finally slowing down, and then they slowly stopped. Lin Feng then abruptly pulled on the reins to make his horse come to a halt. The horse neighed, and suddenly, the legs of Lin Feng's horse suddenly bent and it fell down. At the moment when Lin Feng was pulling on the reins, the horse was already too exhausted to continue. It no longer had the energy to continue. Lin Feng jumped down from the horse. He raised his head and saw that the people he was following were also slowly turning around. While remaining on their horses, they coldly looked towards Lin Feng. Behind these people, Duan Xinyi was staring at Lin Feng. Even though her hair was messy, her beautiful face wasn't covered, and her soft and delicate face revealed that she was touched by Lin Feng's actions. Her expression was bewitching. "Let the princess go." Lin Feng grabbed the long sword from his back. He then slowly started walking forwards. He looked cold and expressionless. The tip of his sword was dragging across the ground, which was sliced open by the sword, leaving a trail behind it. "The prince has given us the order to capture him alive," said one of the Black Guards indifferently. Lin Feng was stupefied, as the prince wanted him alive. The prince was obviously a Mojia. Could it be that he had planned everything from the beginning and had sent these soldiers to escort the princess and run far away with her so that Lin Feng would follow them? It was too bad that we had to spare his life last time. All we could do was take the princess alive. "The prince is too merciful," said one of the men. His face was visible though. Even though he wasn't very old, his face was already covered with a long beard. Besides, What surprised Lin Feng is that even though the 8 people accompanying Duan Xine were all black guards, their helmets were different than normal. Amongst them, 4 of them had a helmet which entirely covered their face except for their eyes. The 4 others were wearing helmets which didn't entirely cover their faces. The one who had just talked was one of those wearing a helmet which didn't cover his entire face. Hu Qiong, even though we cannot kill him, we can teach him a good lesson. We can still be incredibly cruel, said another person. Hu Qiong was surprised. An evil smile appeared on his face. His horse then started walking towards Lin Feng. Do you know what status the 4 of us have? Asked Hu Qiong coldly. The 4 idiots, replied Lin Feng with an indifferent tone. How could he know who Hu Qiong and the others were? Idiots? Hu Qiong smiled coldly. You will realize how foolish you have been to attack us. We are all Black Guard lieutenants. We were leading troops on the battlefield, but because of you and that trap you organized, the prince ordered us to leave and capture you alive. You should be proud of yourself. Lieutenants, Lin Feng was surprised. Because of him, they used the princess as bait and sent 4 lieutenants. Against all expectations, they were really interested in him. But who were the 4 with their faces covered? Even though the chi they released was not as strong as that of the lieutenants, it was also extremely strong. Your strategy to set the city on fire has led to the death of many of our fellow soldiers, and even though I cannot kill you, I want to beat you within an inch of your life. All I feel is hatred towards you, said Hu Qiong. He then grabbed his weapon, which was a gigantic axe. He looked ferocious and terrifying. His axe probably weighed at least a few hundred kilos. Arf! Hu Qiong shouted furiously. His horse suddenly charged towards Lin Feng at full speed. His axe let out a loud thunderous roar as it tore through the air. Lin Feng unsheathed his sword with incredible speed and sliced off the front legs from the horse which Hu Qiong was riding. Hu Qiong continued and jumped from his horse towards Lin Feng. Lin Feng then raised his sword to block the axe as it crashed down from above. When the axe and Lin Feng's long sword met, Lin Feng was pushed down. The shock alone was enough to make Lin Feng groan, as he had been injured. How powerful, thought Lin Feng. He was astonished. He was blankly staring at the enemy. That guy was the same strength as the leader of the Black Guards he killed before, 7th Ling Chi layer. He was a level stronger than Lin Feng. Besides, the pressure of Hu Qiong's battle axe striking Lin Feng felt like a mountain crashing down on him, and it even split the ground beneath him. You cannot even withstand a single attack, laughed Hu Qiong while looking down on Lin Feng. However, when he raised his axe again, he was astonished. Lin Feng suddenly transformed into a shadow and disappeared from sight. Lin Feng had acted so quickly that Hu Qiong didn't even have time to react. He was still clumsily raising his huge axe. Be careful, shouted one of the Black Guards, but it was too late. Lin Feng's sword was already at Hu Qiong's throat. Hu Qiong was still trying to raise his axe, but Lin Feng had already withdrawn his sword. Vanishing shadow was the art of taking people's lives by sudden surprise attacks before they could react. One strike was enough. That was the power of a D-level skill. Even when Lin Feng was still at the 4th Ling Chi layer, he had used the same attack to kill a cultivator at the 7th Ling Chi layer. Lin Feng already possessed the strength of the 6th Ling Chi layer. Not only was his basic strength improved by a great deal, but he had also trained with using his martial skills. Practicing his martial skills allowed him to utilize maximum strength when attacking. He could use his vanishing shadow to slaughter people in an instant. Of course, Lin Feng had managed to kill Hu Qiong, who was at the 7th Ling Chi layer, because he underestimated Lin Feng. He had thought that he was a true expert, and Lin Feng exploited that opportunity. I don't want to die. Hu Qiong's throat let out a small cry, his voice husky. And suddenly, blood poured from his throat, and even if he didn't want to die, he was already dead. Life and death, a momentary slip and it could all be over. Hu Qiong, shouted the 3 other lieutenants at the same time. The three other lieutenants were looking at Hu Qiong's collapsing silhouette, their faces were red with anger. "Hu Qiong!" shouted the three other lieutenants at the same time. The three other lieutenants were looking at Hu Qiong's collapsing silhouette, their faces were red with anger. They then raised their heads and looked at Lin Feng with boiling killing intent. "You dared to kill Hu Qiong," said one of the lieutenants sounding ice-cold while fixedly staring at Lin Feng. "Did you not see it?" asked Lin Feng fearlessly. Lin Feng had an opportunity to kill his opponents, he wasn't going to miss it. Hu Qiong possessed the strength of the 7th Ling Qi layer. Hu Qiong's axe was incredibly powerful to the extent that Lin Feng had been injured by the shock from his attack. If he hadn't killed Hu Qiong, it was the same as committing suicide. During a war, while two sides were fighting, all battles were a matter of life and death. "Gur," the lieutenant gnashed his teeth. He hated Lin Feng and wanted to kill him, but Prince Mo Jia had given the order to capture Lin Feng alive. Nobody dared disobey Mo Jia's orders. "You four, go and capture him," said the lieutenant while turning around to look at the four who had their faces covered. He sounded cold and commanding. "No, we can't do that," said one of them. That lieutenant was surprised. His facial expression became even colder. Lin Feng was also surprised. It seemed like the relationship between them was not that good. But what kind of relationship did they have? "We are willing to send out 3, but 2 of you have to help them to capture him." "How does that sound?" continued the man whose face was covered. He sounded like he was the leader of those 4. "All right," said the lieutenant after being unable to make up his mind for a brief period. He then nodded and said, "If you don't fight with all your strength, don't blame me for being impolite." These 5 people moved towards Lin Feng, 2 lieutenants and 3 of the black guards with their faces covered. When these people released chi and force, Lin Feng felt that he was suffocating. How strong! These people had all broken through to the 7th Ling Qi layer. Looking solemn, Lin Feng's eyes slowly turned dark. His eyes became cold and expressionless. He gave the impression that he could control everything around him. He could perceive everything clearly, even each individual leaf rustling in the wind. While facing 5 strong cultivators of the 7th Ling Qi layer, Lin Feng was completely focused. What seemed like an endless quantity of battle energy was surrounding his body. The ground beneath Lin Feng was shaking and his armor was emitting metallic clangs. Lin Feng was firmly holding his sword. Even when facing 5 cultivators at the 7th Ling Qi layer, Lin Feng didn't flinch. On the path of cultivation, one of the best traits was a strong willpower and unwavering determination. Even if Lin Feng was facing 5 cultivators at the 7th Ling Qi layer, he wouldn't flinch. The only way out was a battle and everything else was destiny. That was the only path to reaching the clouds. Fearlessness led to supreme achievements. They could feel the powerful battle energy that Lin Feng was releasing, so the 5 cultivators remained vigilant. He had killed Hu Qiong, who had broken through to the 7th Ling Qi layer, with a single strike. They couldn't let their guards down and give Lin Feng an exploitable opportunity. First, injure him severely. You don't need to be merciful. Just don't kill him, said one of the lieutenants coldly. Their horses neighed as they all rushed towards Lin Feng. They were all attacking Lin Feng at the same time. Lin Feng's body flickered and just like a shadow moved backwards and avoided the attacks. These 5 people continued to move forwards and suddenly, Lin Feng's silhouette suddenly disappeared without trace. Impossible, these 5 cultivators were astonished. There was only a blurry, dark light which looked like a specter in his place. At the same time, a sensation of danger rose within their hearts. He has a shadow spirit. Unable to change the situation, the 5 people continued rushing towards the specter with regret in their hearts. Dark shadow, die, a subtle sound spread through the atmosphere and blood splashed into the air. The shadow passed by 2 of the black guards and immediately after, Lin Feng became visible again. These 5 people had not grouped together effectively. Lin Feng had his back towards 2 of the black guards who were charging towards him at full speed. However, as they got closer to Lin Feng, their bodies trembled and they fell down from their horses, they were already dead. That was the second part of the D-level skill, Cross Shadow, Dark Shadow. The cultivator could transform into an almost invisible and inaudible shadow. This was also the part which Protector Kong had never managed to master. However, Lin Feng, when releasing his celestial spirit, could use it with a small degree of mastery. Even though it wasn't perfect, he could still transform into a shadow which made him look like a transparent specter, barely visible. Besides, using that skill, he had easily killed 2 cultivators who had a higher cultivation than him. Of course, Lin Feng had to pay a huge price to do so. Lin Feng coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth. He hadn't mastered Dark Shadow, so he wasn't able to turn into a perfect shadow, which is why Lin Feng had been damaged by the opponent's attacks. However, he managed to kill 2 of them, which could be considered a great achievement. However, Lin Feng felt that his internal organs were badly injured. Lin Feng. Duan Xinyi was looking at Lin Feng and her cheeks were rosy. Why was Lin Feng doing all of this to save her? He was fighting so many strong opponents to save her. Bastard, furiously shouted the lieutenant who had not yet got involved. He immediately charged towards Lin Feng while throwing his most powerful punch. Lin Feng could perceive everything around him and could see that fist rushing towards him. Lin Feng quickly punched the ground with his right hand and propelled himself away from the attack. However, he was still affected by the power from that punch. Another mouthful of blood was coughed up as he landed. Lin Feng supported himself on the ground with one hand, but his face was incredibly pale. 8th Ling Qi layer. That lieutenant was also the strongest. He surprisingly had the strength of the 8th Ling Qi layer. You killed my brothers, you must die. As before, that lieutenant wasn't going to give up. He slammed his powerful foot into the ground and jumped through the air. He was launching another punch towards the injured Lin Feng. Boom! Lin Feng's body was propelled backwards. His injuries this time were much more severe. A moment before, he had already been severely injured, but now he had just received 2 punches from a cultivator of the 8th Ling Qi layer. Lin Feng, today you will die. Piercingly cold, deadly energy emerged from the lieutenant's body. He was slowly walking towards Lin Feng. The prince wants him alive. If you kill him, you are disobeying the prince's orders, said one of the men with the helmet covering his face. The lieutenant was surprised. He then immediately said in a cold way, he killed 2 of my brothers, if I cannot kill him, I will cut off his arms. Cut off my arms, said Lin Feng while raising his head. His dark and expressionless eyes looked even more determined. He stood up and an incredible quantity of battle energy emerged from his body. This battle energy was insanely fluctuating around Lin Feng's body. Suddenly a gigantic ice spirit appeared behind Lin Feng and it seemed to reach the sky. It seemed like the entire area was instantly frozen. The temperature immediately dropped. Sword Qi was whistling through the atmosphere. It was sharp and deadly. When the others saw that, they were stupefied. Lin Feng was still able to release such incredible battle energy, his willpower and determination was incredible. He took a step forward looking calm and detached, but after that step, the battle energy around Lin Feng's body turned into a violent tempest which started to rage in the center of the ice. The lieutenant was astonished. He narrowed his eyes. Lin Feng was incredibly dangerous. It seemed like his 2 types of energy had fused together with the energy from heaven and earth. It seemed like Lin Feng could take on anyone, including the lieutenant. He was showing the traits of a true hero. He had incredible willpower and zeal. His heart was fearless, filled with determination, and he felt like he could annihilate everything in his path. Die! Said Lin Feng with a calm voice. However, he didn't use his sword. He used his finger and formed it into a sword. It seemed like his finger had become a real sword. More and more force fused together with the other energy, he was using an energy attack. When Lin Feng raised his finger, it sounded like the air was being pierced by a sword. Boom! The lieutenant quickly released his fierce beast spirit, which released an incredible power. It was an extremely strong spirit, a huge fierce beast that looked like a small mountain. He had the impression that Lin Feng was extremely dangerous. Even though he had broken through to the 8th Ling Qi layer, he was sure that he needed to use all his strength against Lin Feng. He used his most powerful attack, Oblivion Fist, and launched himself toward Lin Feng. Boom! The ground was shaking. An insanely strong wind rose between them, clouds of dust were fiercely blown in all directions. Come back! Lin Feng was violently pushed back but ignored the blood coming from his mouth. Besides, as if his energy was inexhaustible, more piercingly cold qi, more sword qi and more battle energy emerged from body in what seemed to be an endless supply. Boom! The ground immediately caved in and a huge crater appeared where Lin Feng stood. Lin Feng was blown backwards once again and he unceasingly continued to cough up mouthfuls of blood. Duan Xinyi couldn't stand watching this scene any longer. However, it seemed like the quantity of qi emerging from Lin Feng's body didn't stop increasing. All the energy he released was fusing together. That fearless battle energy was becoming as powerful and majestic as the earth and the heavens. The lieutenant was looking at Lin Feng's expressionless eyes and at his ever-increasing qi. His facial expression became even more serious and his fierce beast spirit started to move while roaring loudly. The lieutenant was looking at Lin Feng's expressionless eyes and at his ever-increasing qi. His facial expression became even more serious and his fierce beast spirit started to move while roaring loudly. Die! Shouted the lieutenant. The palm of his hand rushed towards Lin Feng. It was filled with extreme strength and it suddenly transformed into a huge bestial hand. The palm had become large enough to cover Lin Feng's entire body. This was clearly the strength of his spirit. Boom! That incredible force was crashing through the air towards Lin Feng. It felt like even the ground beneath him was shaking under the pressure, he felt like he was suffocating. However, his battle energy wasn't disappearing, Lin Feng was fearless. Instead of using a single finger, he used his entire fist and started to concentrate all of his energy into it. His entire fist became sharper than a sword. Anything that fist touched would be pierced straight through. The lieutenant's palm and Lin Feng's fist collided with a brutal explosion. Boom! Another extremely loud sound filled the air. The ground under Lin Feng's feet had cracked. The lieutenant was like a massive ferocious beast and he struck like a mountain crashing down onto Lin Feng. The noises has suddenly stopped and then the extreme power of the lieutenant's hand started oppressing Lin Feng's body. Lin Feng felt like his bones and internal organs were going to explode. He was badly injured but was still standing upright and he wasn't moving back at all, which caused everyone to blankly stare at him. After a moment the atmosphere became silent. Dripping blood was following the lieutenant's hand as it moved. What nobody knew is that a moment before, Lin Feng's fist had pierced the palm of his hand. There was a huge hole in its center. However, he didn't stop because he knew that Lin Feng's injuries were more severe than his own. At that moment, Lin Feng's fist was still against the lieutenant's palm. They were standing there motionless. Lin Feng's eyes were expressionless and he could clearly feel everything within his surroundings. That was Lin Feng's own world of darkness. His bones had been broken and his internal organs had been severely damaged. He could collapse at any moment and breathe his last breath, but, as before, he was standing tall. In his own world, ice was blue, sword energy was white and battle energy was golden. Everything, in his world, could be seen within his mind. He could borrow force from the world and use it to help him to carry out even more powerful attacks. Energy attacks were the highest achievement he had for using this method. He could make different types of energy fuse together and become even more powerful. Shockingly, each attack could be much stronger when fused than when using a massive amount of a single force. However, no matter if it was force or energy attacks, they were all absorbed from the outside world. They didn't belong to Lin Feng and did not count as his own strength. They were just tools that he could use to harness his strength. They required comprehension and represented a limited power. In the middle of his own world, Lin Feng had to use his own strength. In Lin Feng's world, the three colors were spinning and fusing together. At the same time, around Lin Feng's body, there was no ice, no sword energy and no burning battle energy. At that moment, he looked like an ordinary person who didn't even practice cultivation. There was absolutely nothing exceptional about him. However, while looking extremely common, there was still something mysterious, something which seemed like a heavenly mystery. Lin Feng's body was absorbing the pure qi from heaven and earth, and that pure qi was being absorbed into every cell of his body. Lin Feng's bones, flesh, and muscles were constantly strengthening. His entire skeleton was emitting cracking sounds as if it was trying to reassemble itself from the broken state. The path of cultivation that a person walked could change their entire destiny. That sort of change wasn't brought about by a person's strength. Cultivation could modify cultivators' bones, flesh and muscles to make the body more suitable and stronger in accordance with a person's will. The bones could enhance and become a host for a stronger body. Flesh and muscles could be strengthened and blood vessels could be enhanced. A person's temperament was the only thing that could strengthen the power of the mind and spirit. A person's temperament would be affected by the cultivator's training method and actions. It was also the subject of constant change. Bones constantly needed to change and become stronger in order to be in perfect harmony with the strengthened body. That sort of change required damage. The bones had to be broken before they could become stronger. The weak flesh needed to be destroyed before it could become more resilient. When the body was broken, it could continue to become stronger. However, this was only meant for within cultivation practice, not battle. It was as if Lin Feng had changed the rules. He had only broken through to the 6th Ling Qi layer and his bones had been broken by external damage. This wasn't done in the process of cultivation, but during battle. However, Lin Feng was using the external forces to gain a better understanding of cultivation and to strengthen his body. He had broken bones, yet he was still standing. The people who were present were astonished. Their hearts were racing. They could feel that Lin Feng had changed, but they couldn't say what had changed about him. He still seemed to be the same person as before. His temperament had completely changed. His face suddenly looked rigid and he immediately collapsed. A cultivator of the 8th Ling Qi layer was dead. Lin Feng, with his strength, had already killed 3 cultivators of the 7th Ling Qi layer as well as one of the 8th Ling Qi layer. From those 8 black guards, 1 lieutenant was left as well as 3 people whose faces were covered. Lin Feng turned around and looked at one of the people, whose face was covered. He was next to the princess. That person immediately moved aside and opened the way for Lin Feng. He then said, "The princess is yours." Lin Feng was stupefied. He moved towards the princess and looked at the man whose face was covered, and he saw him move towards the 3 remaining survivors. "You're not going to kill him?" coldly asked the last remaining lieutenant while looking at the man, whose face was covered. "There are only 4 of us. Even if we all attack together, we only have a small chance of winning," said the man whose face was covered while moving towards the lieutenant. He then suddenly transformed into a shadow, jumped off his horse and rushed towards the last remaining lieutenant. An extremely strong wind emanated from his hand and crashed into the lieutenant's chest. The lieutenant's heart twitched. His internal organs had been damaged beyond repair by that attack. The lieutenant wanted to speak, but he then saw the masked man carrying out a final attack against him. The lieutenant then fell off his horse, dead. Lin Feng looked surprised. The 2 others with their helmets covering their faces also looked at Lin Feng. They peculiar look in their eyes. "Lin Feng, the 3 of us will not fight against you. You can leave," said one of them sounding cold. They had all moved out of Lin Feng's path together. "You guys are all right with my decision, right?" The 2 others remained silent and immediately nodded. "Let's go," said the leader of the men. Immediately after, they turned around and left. They saw that Lin Feng didn't intend to stop them. Their horses neighed and they then started galloping away at full speed, fearing that Lin Feng might change his mind. But when they had both caught up to the leader of the group, a brutal energy crashed into their bodies. The sound of thunder spread through the atmosphere and blood poured from the two black guards' mouths. Immediately after, another strike of that powerful energy hit them from behind. They could only feel their body go rigid. They tried to release their own energy and move away, but it was already too late. At the moment when they tried to move themselves away, a lethal hand strike pierced both of their chests, killing them in an instant. Lin Feng and Duan Xinyi were astonished. They slowly turned around and looked at the final remaining black guard. They only saw that he was moving towards them. When he arrived in front of Lin Feng and Duan Xinyi, he said, "Lin Feng, even though you have become stronger at the critical moment, you are now very weak and cannot fight for much longer. I advise that you to avoid future trouble and to find a place to rest." Ha! Lin Feng narrowed his eyes. He knew that he was very weak at that moment. Indeed, even though Lin Feng's broken bones had started to reassemble themselves and he could fuse with his sword, his bones still hadn't completely recovered. Besides, his internal organs had been severely damaged. Lin Feng perfectly understood that he was in no state to continue fighting. When he saw that the man wanted to leave without killing him, he felt like he was truly too weak. Besides, Lin Feng couldn't understand why that person was willing to help him. Who is that person really? Why was he with the black guards? "Who are you?" asked Lin Feng. "You don't need to know who I am, Lin Feng. You have a strong determination and willpower, you are fearless, these qualities are engraved deep in your heart and they make you the cultivator that you are today. Not everybody can be like that, many people chose to be scared of dying and suffer in silence," said the man without answering Lin Feng's question. "Lin Feng, this war between our two countries is not as simple to understand as you imagine. Behind the curtains, we are just pawns, nobodies. They will sacrifice us at any time to achieve what they desire, like savage animal. This time, you took a risk but it wasn't worth it because nothing was going to happen to the princess," said the man with the helmet still covering his face. His eyes, which were visible, were looking at Lin Feng and looked sincere. "Don't forget to not return using the same road you used to come. Not all the MOU army will die during the war, or at least, Mo Jia will not die. Wait until they come back to MOU and then you can go back to Shuiyu. Finally, it is my wish that you will make the Yunhai sect rise once again." When that man finished talking, he turned around and galloped away at full speed. His silhouette gradually disappeared on the horizon. Lin Feng was looking at that silhouette from behind and lights were flashing in his eyes. 1,000 thoughts were flashing through his mind. "Make the Yunhai sect rise once again," repeated Lin Feng in a low voice. That man had said that Lin Feng was determined and fearless, that these values were deeply engraved in his heart, and said that many people suffered in silence, scared for their lives. Maybe this person was speaking of himself, suffering in silence to save his own life. That person must have been a former member of the Yunhai sect. Indeed, that person was indeed a former member of the Yunhai sect. Besides, he had chosen to take refuge in the holy courtyard of Shuiyu to save his own life, which is why he said those words. That person had skills as limpid as water, he was extremely strong and had broken through to the 8th Ling Qi layer. In Lin Feng's mind, he could only think of one person. There had been an incredibly strong disciple in the Yunhai sect. Ling Hu. He Shan. That person used to be the first disciple of the Yunhai sect core disciples, Ling Hu Hishan. Lin Feng, this war between our two countries is not as simple to understand as you imagine. Behind the curtains, we are just pawns, nobodies. They will sacrifice us at any time to achieve what they desire, like savage animal. This time, you took a risk but it wasn't worth it because nothing was going to happen to the princess. Lin Feng recalled Ling Hu Hishan's words once again. His heart was pounding. Indeed, Ling Hu Hishan had been at the princess' side, which meant that the 4 men with helmets covering their faces were all students of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu. Students of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu as well as black guards had been working together to secure the princess. People who were meant to be absolute enemies had been collaborating. The leader of the Mou armies was Mo Jia and the leader of the holy courtyard of Shuiyu was Duan Tianlang. When Lin Feng thought about that, cold killing intent invaded his entire body and penetrated into his heart and even his bones. This war was like a chess game. Its outcome was planned from the beginning. The fact that the princess had been kidnapped, the chaos amongst the troops, the lives of a few 100,000 soldiers, everything had been planned from the beginning and was part of their plan. Everything had been planned so that the people behind the curtains could achieve their goals. These people wanted Lin Feng dead, which is why they captured the princess in Lin Feng's presence and had then blamed Lu Zhanglan. That tragedy had led to the death of hundreds of thousands of people. However, Lin Feng had given his best to ruin their plans. He had been unwilling to give up and had made great efforts to find the princess. Was that really worth it though? Fortunately, Lin Feng hadn't died. He had gained enlightenment through battle and had learned how to master sword fusion. He was much stronger now than before. Lin Feng stood there while remaining silent. Finally, he moved and took a deep breath. All his thoughts vanished like smoke. Lin Feng had a clear conscience and had stuck to his beliefs. That was enough. That plot and the conspiracy to take his life had actually helped him to become stronger. His path of cultivation would allow him to reach the clouds and to destroy any plots or conspiracies that came his way. Lin Feng turned around and looked at Duan Xinyi with a cold and indifferent glare. He was absolutely expressionless, as if he was looking at a stranger. Lin Feng, said Duan Xinyi when she saw Lin Feng's expression. Lin Feng's cold expression made her heart start to race. She just saw Lin Feng raise his hand, and in a flash, the vines constricting her body were cut down. When he finished, Lin Feng turned around and left, while surprisingly ignoring Duan Xinyi. Initially, she was a good person and was safe inside the capital. But because she decided to come to the battlefield, hundreds of thousands of people had to die. Lin Feng himself had almost died trying to save her. Lin Feng, I didn't know, said Duan Xinyi in a low voice. Her eyes were moist. She had heard Ling Hu Hishan and obviously understood everything he said. She also knew what Lin Feng was thinking at that moment. As a princess, she had played the key role in the conspiracy. How could all these things be unclear to her? She was royalty who could pass the heavy curtains to enter the imperial palace. Besides, Lin Feng had already asked her why she wanted to come to the battlefield even though it wasn't necessary for her to be there and was even dangerous. That conspiracy was obviously the reason why she had come. She could perfectly understand Lin Feng's feelings. Lin Feng continued forward. He didn't look like he intended to stop. He looked steady and firm. Lin Feng, I really didn't know, said Duan Xinyi, tears were flowing from her eyes. She felt a heavy pain gripping her heart. Only a woman in love could feel such a pain within her heart. Maybe she had actually fallen in love. A horse-driven carriage was moving down an ancient road. A horse-driven carriage was moving down an ancient road. 3 horses were pulling the carriage. Behind that carriage, there were many people riding horses and acting as guards. Niai, the person driving the carriage, pulled back on the reins and came to a stop. Then, guards on the right and left of the carriage continued moving forwards. A person was lying on the ground. That person was wearing the armor of a soldier. Fu Bo, his heartbeat is normal, there is no irregularity at all. He's alive but unconscious, said one man to the driver of the carriage while checking the person's body. Move him to the side of the road. We have to hurry, said the driver of the carriage indifferently. The man was about to execute the order, but at that moment, a pair of lily-white hands opened the curtains of the carriage. A delicate face appeared from behind the curtains. It was a beautiful young girl, she was very young. Lights were flashing in her eyes. Fu Bo, how could a soldier end up here lying on the road? Asked the young woman whose voice was clear and limpid. Fu Bo shook his head and said, I'm not sure, but in our country, Mou, ordinary soldiers are not that strong. Except for soldiers whose rank is lieutenant or above, the others are not considered strong on the battlefield. That person must be extremely weak, which would explain why he was abandoned on the road. Oh, said the young girl while slightly nodding. A light flashed in her eyes and she said, "Take him with us in the carriage." "Miss, this is not appropriate," said Fu Bo, who was surprised. "It doesn't matter, Fu Bo," said the young girl while ignoring him and smiling. She then talked to the man who was standing at the soldier's side and said, "Carry him over here and put him inside the carriage." That guards glanced at Fu Bo. However, Fu Bo had no choice but to nod. The guards had no other choice but to carry the unconscious soldier into the carriage. The carriage then slowly continued moving forwards. In the carriage, there was delicate young woman and young girl who was about 10 years old. She was also very pretty. "Ziling, why did you bring a stranger into the carriage?" asked the young woman. She was curiously looking at the young soldier lying down in the carriage. She could help but frown. "Zi, big sister, look, he looks so young, can you guess his age?" said the young beautiful little girl as if she hadn't heard the original question. She looked very curious as well. Ziling glanced at Zi and slightly shook her head. She then looked at the lying young man and frowned. Suddenly, she looked perplexed. What a delicate and handsome young man, thought Zi while sighing. Even though that young man was unconscious, his face was delicate, he had dashing eyebrows and his cheeks looked extremely delicate. His entire body was covered with dust from the road. That young man didn't look like a soldier. Why was he wearing armor? "Zi, sister, that young man and you seem to be the same age. He's very handsome. You would be a perfect couple," said Ziling. "Don't talk nonsense," said Zi. "Zi, sister, I'm just joking. I know that your husband would have to be stronger than you. You have already broken through to the 3rd Ling Chi layer, you're a genius. He's very young and he's a soldier, how could he be stronger than you?" said Ziling while smiling. Zi was just shaking her head. "Ziling, instead of talking about me, you should be talking about your cultivation, especially your sword skills." He laughed. Ziling then said, "Zi, sister, why does Zi Chong suddenly want to get married? I didn't think that he had a girl he liked." When Zi heard Ziling, she frowned and immediately said, "The day of the offerings for the gods and ancestors is approaching. Zi Chong needs to be married to gain access to the forbidden area. Therefore, his wedding is a very normal thing. Concerning the girl, I heard that they've only known each other for a few days. Otherwise, I don't much more than you." A light flashed in Ziling's eyes and then she shook her head as a sign that she didn't understand such complicated things. But at that moment, the young man lying in the carriage moved his finger. Ziling was surprised and said, "He's awake." Then, the young man's hand started to move. Immediately after, he opened his eyes. The young man's eyes were big and beautiful, but at that moment, his eyes revealed uncertainty. That young man was Lin Feng. On that day, after the conversation with Duan Xianyi, he left her and walked for a great distance. He didn't get the impression that something was wrong with his body, but suddenly, he fainted and did not know what happened after that. He had no idea what happened. He didn't even know how many days had passed since that moment. Ziling and Zi were surprised when they saw Lin Feng. What a handsome young man! At that moment, his eyes were open as he laid on the floor of the carriage. "Where am I?" asked Lin Feng while looking at the two girls. He looked perplexed. "You're awake. My name is Ziling. You were lying on the road and we accidentally came across you, so we took you into our carriage," said Ziling while blinking unceasingly. She then said, "Oh, by the way, how did you faint on that road? And are you a soldier? What is your military ranking? How strong are you?" Ziling was unceasingly asking questions which caused Lin Feng's mind to spin. He said in a weak voice, "Is it okay if I get up first?" "Oh, okay," said Ziling, a bit embarrassed. Immediately after, Lin Feng, who was lying on the floor, stood up and sat down opposite the girl. "My name is Lin Feng. I fainted because I was injured. I am just an ordinary soldier. My strength is. While talking, Lin Feng tried to gather some of his pure qi, but then, he suddenly looked astonished. He just had the feeling that he was empty inside and there wasn't even a trace of pure qi. What's wrong? Lin Feng's heart was pounding. His eyes were turbulent. He remembered that he had become stronger. He should have become much stronger, but at that moment, he surprisingly couldn't manage to condense any pure qi. There wasn't any pure qi inside of his body any longer. What's wrong? Asked Ziling when she saw that Lin Feng's facial expression changed so drastically. She then asked, "You were just about to tell us how strong you were." Lin Feng glanced at Ziling and immediately after, he closed his eyes. He could still clearly perceive everything around him. Even without releasing the first layer of his celestial spirit, he was still able to perceive every part of his body, the muscles, the flesh and the blood vessels. He could perfectly sense everything that was happening within his body. If Lin Feng wanted, he could perceive everything that was happening around him to a circumference of 1,000 kilometers, the whole world would become an image within his mind. Indeed, I have become stronger and it even seems that my bones, flesh and muscles are much stronger than before. Lin Feng opened his eyes and used one hand to violently punch the palm of his other hand. He had gained impressive strength. Even though there was no pure qi, while considering his body's strength, he was much stronger than he was before. That meant that he now had a stronger constitution. However, Lin Feng persistently tried to control pure qi, but something was wrong. It seemed like there was absolutely no pure qi within his body. What the hell has happened to me? Thought Lin Feng while frowning. He had become stronger but did not have any pure qi. What was that supposed to mean? Could it be that, after he became stronger and mastered his sword fusion, something strange happened to his body? Why would his pure qi have run dry? Lin Feng tried to absorb pure qi into his body again, but it would only circulate within his body, it wouldn't penetrate inside or be absorbed. It seemed like the external world and the inside of his body were completely separated. Whatever he tried, it seemed like the universe did not agree. Lin Feng had never heard of such a condition, let alone seen it. He didn't understand what was happening to him. Lin Feng was firmly frowning for a long time and then tried to relax. His cultivation was unlikely to have been crippled. Maybe it was something good, maybe he had entered an unknown path on the road to cultivation. While thinking that, Lin Feng felt a bit relieved. At that moment, there was no amazing energy inside of him, but it wasn't a bad thing. He still had the qi that an ordinary person who did not practice cultivation would have. He even looked even more handsome. "Why are you not talking?" asked Ziling while looking at Lin Feng after seeing that his facial expression didn't stop changing while he remained silent. Lin Feng raised his head and looked at Ziling. He then said, "It seems like I have no strength at all." "No strength?" sighed Ziling surprised. She had a strange expression on her face. "A piece of trash then?" said Zi straightforwardly. She frowned. A person who had no strength was obviously a piece of trash. In the continent, nobody could gain a high place within society if they weren't strong. They would systematically thrown aside even if they were handsome. At that moment, she looked at Lin Feng with disdain. When Lin Feng heard the expression, "piece of trash," he raised his head and saw that both girls were looking at him with different looks than before. It made him feel exasperated. When Lin Feng heard the expression, "piece of trash," he raised his head and saw that both girls were looking at him with different looks than before. It made him feel exasperated. In the world of cultivation, those who were not strong would only be thrown away. However, some people, even though they thought that way, didn't show what they thought to other people, which was much better than how Zi was behaving. "Ziling, let's kick him out of the carriage," said Zi in a cold and detached way. She sounded calm and unscrupulous. At that moment, she only thought about the fact that the person she was looking at was a piece of trash, even though he was handsome. "Are you not a soldier? How come you don't practice cultivation? Haven't you at least broken through to the qi layer?" asked Ziling while looking at Lin Feng. She was looking at him with a strange look. I was injured and now it seems like I don't have the slightest bit of strength, said Lin Feng while shaking his head. He wasn't going to get angry because of Ziyi's words. Lin Feng had just gone through war. He had gone through a great deal of horrible things and seen oceans of blood flowing on the battlefield. His heart had matured and he realized that his previous actions were childish. His temperament had evolved, it would now be difficult for him to be affected by the words of others. Oh, said Ziling while nodding. She was looking at Lin Feng while looking pensive as if she was thinking about a solution for Lin Feng. Ziling, if the people of the mountain village know that we have a piece of trash inside the carriage, they will make fun of us and laugh. Let's kick him out, okay? Said Ziyi again. She really had no manners, talking about Lin Feng to his face. A piece of trash was nothing to them, so she didn't need to speak in a tactful way. Even if he felt humiliated, it did not matter. Ziyi, sister, meeting him was fate, there is no need to be so heartless and cruel, said Ziling while shaking her head and then said, Lin Feng, I will allow you to act as my servant. You will be under my care and you can enter our mountain village. Servant? Lin Feng was astonished. Become her slave? In his heart, he was smiling wryly. He wouldn't have thought that he would be forced into servitude like that, but he was still within the borders of Mou while unable to absorb pure qi. He had no cultivation. If he ventured alone, he would probably encounter a dangerous situation, therefore, it was better for him to act as a servant. If he regained his strength, who would dare treat him like a servant? Lin Feng slightly nodded and didn't express his opinion. Very good, then it is settled, said Ziling while smiling. Ziyi remained silent while shaking her head. The Ziwei mountain village was surrounded by mountains. It was a quiet and beautiful place. It was situated in the north of Mou. It was a place of great influence and it belonged to the Z clan. It was said that the strongest cultivator of the Z clan was at the Xian Qi layer. Besides, the Z clan was extremely old, even older than the Mou country. However, as time passed, its influence declined. Ziling was the eldest daughter of the Ziwei mountain village clan. Ziyi had been adopted and raised by Ziling's father. Therefore, in the Ziwei mountain village, Ziling had more authority than Ziyi, which is why even though Ziyi wanted to make Lin Feng leave the carriage, if Ziling didn't accept, Ziyi had no choice but to accept it. The Ziwei mountain village was extremely vast. The place where Ziling lived was picturesque, clear water and green gardens. It was surrounded by a huge garden and emerald bamboo trees. It looked particularly peaceful. At this moment, Lin Feng was holding a broom and was sweeping the courtyard of the garden. However, he wasn't paying attention to the ground at all, he was lost in his own thoughts. He was able to sense the pure qi of heaven and earth. His perception was even clearer and more distinct than before, but he was still unable to absorb it and make it penetrate his body. That strange condition was troubling him so much that his heart started to race as he thought about it. A single leaf was floating on the wind. Lin Feng looked at that leaf and could distinctly perceive where it was going and where it would land on the ground. Lin Feng grabbed the broom with his left hand and raised his right hand, like a sword, he moved it towards the leaf in an attempt to cut it. Even though there was no pure qi and no sword energy, his hand still moved like a sword with incredible strength. However, when Lin Feng's hand got close to the leaf, it just moved away and continued floating through the air. He couldn't touch it and couldn't catch it. It would move away from him every time. Lin Feng could only slice through the air, but not cut the leaf. I cannot cut it. Lin Feng was a bit surprised. The leaf fell onto the ground. A tree leaf was simple, but Lin Feng couldn't touch it. Even though the position of the leaf was perfectly clear in his mind, he was unable to predict its next movements. If he tried to touch the leaf, its trajectory would change. If Lin Feng could control pure qi, it would have been very easy for him to cut a leaf, but at that moment, even though his hand was still like a sword, he was unable to cut the leaf. Even though I am fused with my sword, it seems that it's not enough, as if something is missing, whispered Lin Feng. Even though he was, indeed, stronger than before, Lin Feng had the impression he was in front of a locked door and was only single step away from unlocking it. He was in a complex situation, and if he didn't take the next step, he wouldn't be able to absorb pure qi. I remember on the day when I became stronger, my bones had been broken, my internal organs were severely wounded, my determination had allowed me to make battle energy, sword energy, and ice energy fuse all together. Like that, I had transformed into a sharp sword. What I was thinking about at that moment was my sword more than the energy attack. I had managed to carry out sword fusion. My determination is what played the decisive role in me becoming stronger, whispered Lin Feng, trying to recall the moment when he gained his strength. I managed to carry out my sword fusion by relying on my spirit, on the first layer of my celestial spirit. It helped become physically stronger and become more aware of the world surrounding me. My spirit enabled me to understand my sword in a much greater detail and allowed me to fuse with my sword. It seems like amongst all the things I understood, there is something that I am missing, as if I do not yet have the requirements to use my current strength, thought Lin Feng while his heart was pounding as if he had just received a glimpse of enlightenment. His spirit was extremely strong and had enabled him to become stronger and reach this unique situation. However, it seemed like that without using the power of his spirit, he wasn't strong enough to use the power. Therefore, because of his special condition, he was unable to absorb pure qi. I use battle energy, ice energy, sword energy, and fuse them together as a sword. It's not battle energy and it's not ice energy. Even though it is a leaf, it follows the force of the wind without being cut. Could I make the energy of heaven and earth fuse with the leaf? Lin Feng was holding the broom and was lost in thought. He was standing in the huge garden facing the bamboo forest while remaining completely motionless. A middle-aged man and Ze stopped walking when they saw Lin Feng in the garden. "Father, this is the piece of trash that we came across last time." Ziling insisted on him coming to the village mountain, to let him take care of the garden and let him live here, explained Ze to the middle-aged man while looking at Lin Feng. At that moment, the middle-aged man was fixedly staring at Lin Feng looking pensive. "Father, don't you want to kick him out?" said Ze when she saw that the middle-aged man remained silent. "Stop talking," said the middle-aged man while staring at Lin Feng. Lin Feng was standing there remaining motionless, but dust was flowing around him as if there was a vortex created around Lin Feng. It was very subtle, it was impossible to notice it without paying extreme attention. Ze glanced at Lin Feng and didn't know what her father was looking at. Her eyes were filled with disdain and then she didn't look at Lin Feng again. A piece of trash wasn't worth her attention. "Father, I'm going to call Ziling," said Ze to the middle-aged man. Her father ignored her. She shook her head and moved towards the house in the middle of the garden. After she left, something strange happened. The vortex surrounding Lin Feng was becoming faster and more violent. Besides, Lin Feng had a marvelous expression on his face. At that moment, Lin Feng seemed to be fusing with heaven and earth. The middle-aged man was amazed. "How strange," whispered the middle-aged man. At that moment, Lin Feng was giving him an extraordinary impression. "How strange," whispered the middle-aged man. At that moment, Lin Feng was giving him an extraordinary impression. When looking at Lin Feng's back, he had the feeling he was looking at a celestial being. Lin Feng made his heartbeat race. Was Lin Feng really the person Ze was talking about? Has he come to the Ziwei mountain village to become a servant, or is it because he doesn't care about what we think of him and seeks to advance his cultivation? Thought the middle-aged man. On the continent, it wasn't uncommon for disciples belonging to powerful clans to practice cultivation on a journey. Some of them went to war and gained experience on the battlefield while others degraded themselves to become slaves to test their determination, to change their state of mind. The middle-aged man thought that Lin Feng probably belonged to the second category. Otherwise, that young man would unlikely be standing there while controlling the qi of heaven and earth. How could he become a servant and clean the garden in a small mountain village? The middle-aged man took a step and then started walking slowly towards Lin Feng. However, he was walking very carefully, trying not to make any sound. He was afraid that he would interrupt Lin Feng. At that moment, Lin Feng's state of mind was as limpid as water. He was absolutely lost in his thoughts, not paying attention to his surroundings. On that day, when I reached my current state, around my body was battle energy, ice energy and sword energy, before I made all the energy fuse together. Why did it become sword energy? Why didn't it become ice energy or battle energy? Lin Feng kept asking himself thousands of questions. A sword can have sword force, a blade can have blade force, a sword can be used to carry out an energy attack just like a blade. When a cultivator masters the sword, they can fuse with their sword. When they master the blade, they can fuse together with their blade. Well, what about the other types of energy? For example, a moment ago, the leaf was floating on the wind, however a leaf has leaf force, when the wind controlling the leaf has wind force. Force is present in all things and can be used for energy attacks and fused. Swords and blades are not the only things which produce force, it should be possible to fuse with all of the 10,000 things of creation. Lin Feng felt like he had realized something. He suddenly gained enlightenment. Lin Feng raised his hand in the air and slashed it through the air, like a shadow, his movement was invisible. Suddenly, a leaf was cut into hundreds of pieces which floated through the air. Even though Lin Feng was closing his eyes, he had a feeling of absolute control, as if he could control everything around him. He had the same feeling as when he was using his spirit, but it was different to some extent. When he used his spirit, his entire world became darkness, but at that moment, it seemed like he had fused together with the earth. He could clearly perceive everything that was happening around him. In the manuals of cultivation, it was said that cultivation depended on your awareness level and your advancement. As far as awareness is concerned, if you wanted to open the door which lead to the truth of the universe, first, you had to become one with the earth. Become one with the earth, thought Lin Feng. He opened his eyes and a faint smile appeared on his face. He wasn't overjoyed and didn't look arrogant either. At that moment, Lin Feng looked ordinary yet magnificent. He had reached another dimension of cultivation, which was in perfect harmony with his path of cultivation. Lin Feng turned around and looked at the middle-aged man who wasn't standing very far from him. Lin Feng smiled at him. That smile made the middle-aged man feel unworthy. "Young cultivator," said the middle-aged man. His voice was filled with respect. Lin Feng looked at the middle-aged man and nodded as a sign of politeness. "Young cultivator, my daughters are extremely rash and immature. I, Zinan, have come here to apologize. I hope that you can forgive my daughters," said the middle-aged man while slightly bowing. How could his daughters call this young man a nobody? Even though his adopted daughter had talent, her behavior was unacceptable in front of such a talented young man. "My name is Lin Feng. I do not blame them, but the world we live in. Coming to this village was my own decision," replied Lin Feng indifferently. For having been able to penetrate into the dimension Earth fusion, Lin Feng should be thankful to Ziling and Zi for having brought him to the Ziwei mountain village. He was a servant there for a few days. While sweeping the garden, his heart felt peaceful and serene. He could calmly occupy himself with his current cultivation problems, which enabled him to break through the final barrier. If Ziling hadn't picked him up on the roadside, Lin Feng didn't know what might have happened. Penetrating into the Earth fusion dimension was an extremely rare thing. If Lin Feng had really penetrated into it, it was by relying on luck. When Zinan heard Lin Feng, he was sure that he had guessed correctly. Lin Feng was certainly the disciple of a powerful clan who had left home to practice cultivation. There was absolutely no doubt about it. "Is there a cultivation room in the village? If you have one, please let me use it," said Lin Feng. "Of course," immediately replied Zinan and then added, "Young cultivator, please follow me." While talking, the middle-aged man started walking and leading the way. He and Lin Feng was walking towards the bamboo forest. It was a very mysterious place. The pure qi of heaven and earth was in a dense fog floating above the ground. The qi was very thick and powerful here. Zinan said, "Young cultivator, this is the best cultivation location of the Ziwei mountain, which is why we built the village here. Young cultivator, you can immediately go inside." Besides, there are many purity stones inside, you can use however many you need. Zinan was very generous. Having the opportunity to get acquainted with such a rare young genius was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Lin Feng slightly nodded and went into the room. The pure qi of heaven and earth condensed into a white fog. Lin Feng wouldn't have thought that a place like Ziwei would have such a great place for cultivation. When Lin Feng arrived inside, he saw a myriad of purity stones on the ground. He sat cross-legged and entered into a tranquil state of mind. Suddenly, Lin Feng fused with the earth and a colossal amount of pure qi started penetrating into his body at a shocking speed. With eagerness, Lin Feng absorbed as much of the pure qi that was rushing into him as possible. Lin Feng didn't spend too much time in the cultivation room. 1 hour later, he left the room. When he came out, Zinan was sitting on the ground waiting for Lin Feng. "Young cultivator," said Zinan while standing up. He had a smile on his face. At that moment, there was nothing strange about Lin Feng, as if he was the exact same person that entered the room. However, Lin Feng was shrouded in mystery. "Let's go," said Lin Feng. The two of them left and went back towards the garden. Ziyi and Ziling were looking for their father everywhere. At that moment, by coincidence, they turned around and saw their father. When they saw that he was with Lin Feng, they couldn't help but be surprised. Ziyi shouted, "Father! Ziling and I have been looking for you everywhere." "Dad, we are getting ready to leave," said Ziling while smiling. She then looking at Lin Feng and said, "Lin Feng, you can tidy this place and then make preparations for our departure." "How dare you!" shouted Zinan. Ziling was slightly surprised. She then saw that Zinan was staring at her and was about to add something, but Lin Feng spoke first. "Miss, where are you going? Our clan also controls the government of the Ziwei. In a few days, the young master Ziqiong will get married, and because we are related, we obviously have to go and congratulate him. This is why I asked Ziling and Ziyi to prepare to leave for the Z government," replied Zinan before either of the girls could respond. Lin Feng nodded to indicate that he understood. Lin Feng understood that the young master of their clan was going to get married and they had to go pay respects. "Daddy, we've heard that Ziqiong's wife is very beautiful, much more beautiful than all the women in the clan. Besides, she's from Shuiyu. I also heard that she did not want to marry him. Is this really true?" said Ziling while shaking her head. Her eyes were filled with curiosity while looking towards Zinan. "Don't talk nonsense," said Zinan while frowning. Immediately after, he said in a low voice, "There are some rumors which say that the beautiful woman is the princess of Shuiyu, but it is not confirmed. We cannot talk about this on the outside." "Oh, I see," said Ziling while blinking. As far as Lin Feng was concerned, he was shaking. The princess of Shuiyu? Lin Feng knew that there was only one princess in Shuiyu, and that was Duan Xinyi. Could it be her? Lin Feng frowned. On that day, Lin Feng had stormed away from Duan Xinyi and didn't know what had happened to her. Besides, from what Zinan was saying, that woman was the princess of Shuiyu. She was beautiful, and besides, it seemed like she was being forced into the marriage. The chances of her being Duan Xinyi were high. "Master, I will come with you," said Lin Feng to Zinan. Zinan was surprised. He looked at Lin Feng with a serious look. He was obviously not going to refuse. "Could it be that you want to go because you heard that the woman was very beautiful? Is it why you are so impatient to leave?" said Ziyi with a smile on her face while looking at Lin Feng before adding, "But the future husband is Ziqiong, you are only a servant. Your social status is way too low. Don't even have such thoughts or you might die. The best thing you can do is continue your life as a lowly servant." "Shut up," shouted Zinan and immediately looked at Lin Feng. "Lin Feng, young cultivator, if you want to go then you can take my place. I hope that you will look after my two girls until they arrive." Zinan's logic was simple. He was hoping that, by spending some time alone with his girls, Lin Feng would get along with them. Zinan's logic was simple. He was hoping that, by spending some time alone with his girls, Lin Feng would get along with them. Ziling was a few years younger than Lin Feng. Ziyi and Lin Feng were about the same age. Even though they couldn't be considered as very beautiful, they were cute. Besides, they were quite strong. If Lin Feng could get along with them, that would be a nice thing. Of course, even if he didn't manage to get along with them, he could still ensure their protection. What could he have against them traveling together? However, at that moment, Ziyi and Ziling were surprised. They were looking at their father, Zinan. In a strange way, their father was calling Lin Feng young cultivator. "Dad, what did you call him?" asked Ziling, who was very surprised. Usually, her father almost never scolded her, and at that moment, he had already scolded her twice because of Lin Feng. "Ziling, Ziyi, your behavior is inadmissible. Lin Feng's cultivation level is much more advanced than yours. The fact that he is patient and accommodating with you is just due to his kind and magnanimous personality. You just don't know how to distinguish good from bad. Daring to treat him as a servant, you are really shameless." Zinan scolded his two daughters again. His words were profound and meaningful. He then said, "This time, I will let Lin Feng go with you. You too should ask Lin Feng for advice and listen to what he tells you. You should make sure to stay friendly with him. His cultivation level is much more advanced than ours," said Ziling while staring at Lin Feng. She was extremely curious. She then said, "Father, are really not mistaken? Father, you shouldn't trust him. He is a nobody," said Ziyi, who didn't believe her father's words. She was a genius and had already broken through to the third Ling Qi layer. Besides, she was about the same age as Lin Feng, so it was impossible for him to be stronger than her. "Shut up! How dare you doubt my words," shouted Zinan, who had no alternative but to shout. He then continued, "Hurry up and go pack your things, get ready to leave." "Humph." Zi poked out her tongue and immediately dragged Ziling to leave. While looking at the two girls leave, Zinan shook his head and he then looked at Lin Feng with a wry smile on his face. "Young cultivator, my daughters are naughty and mischievous, I hope that you will not take offense." Lin Feng slightly smiled and shook his head, indicating that he wasn't offended. Zinan didn't seem to feel at ease. Could it be that Lin Feng's cultivation level is so high that he does not care about status and doesn't care about the words of normal people? Ziling and Ziyi just packed a few clothes and the necessities of travel. Outside of the Ziwei mountain village, Ziling, Ziyi and Lin Feng were riding on 3 Qian Li Shui horses. As Zinan had said, only the 3 of them were going to the Z government. Initially, he thought he had to go to pay his respects, but then he thought that the people of Z government would understand if they saw a talented young cultivator with his 2 daughters. "Lin Feng, young cultivator, I must inconvenience you to look after my 2 girls," said Zinan in a low voice. Lin Feng slightly nodded and said, "I will ensure their safety until we arrive at the Z government." Lin Feng didn't mention anything about a return journey, and Zinan noticed, but he said nothing. He just nodded. If Lin Feng got along with his daughters on the journey, he would come back with them. If he didn't get along with them, he wouldn't. "Daddy, Ziyi and I are together, could anything bad happen?" "We're going now," said Ziling while turning her head around. Immediately after, the horses started galloping. Ziyi and Lin Feng were in the front, Ziling was behind them. "Lin Feng, what did you tell my father for him to trust you so much?" asked Ziyi while galloping right next to Lin Feng. "I didn't say anything," said Lin Feng indifferently. He didn't even glance at her, which made Ziyi groan coldly. "Sister, I can see that Daddy thinks highly of him, he's trying to make you guys into a couple," said Ziling from behind while smiling. "I will not get married to a piece of trash," said Ziyi while whipping her horse to move ahead of Lin Feng. Lin Feng, as before, looked calm and indifferent. At that moment, he was still wondering if the woman who was going to marry Ziqiong was really Duan Xinyi. The Ziwei village mountain was a 2-day journey from the Z government, and Ziqiong's wedding ceremony was taking place in 3 days. Boom! 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 Lightning illuminated the entire atmosphere as it started raining heavily. The road of the Golden Z Mountain was becoming wet and muddy. The Z government was situated on the Golden Z Mountain, which was part of a chain of mountains. At that moment, at the foot of the Golden Z Mountain, there was a thatched hut. The three people on their Qianli Shui horses rushed over to the hut, jumped off their horses and rushed into the thatched hut, which turned out to be very spacious. That damned weather! We arrive at the foot of the mountain and it starts raining heavily. Initially, we should have been able to arrive at the Z government and would have been able to sleep in comfortable beds before the wedding, cursed Zee, who was wet from head to foot. Her clothes were sticking close to her skin, which revealed her already developed figure. One could clearly see her alluring figure. At that moment, Zee suddenly had the impression that she was being observed. She frowned and looked inside the thatched hut. 3 people were sitting on the ground. These people, when they saw her enter, started staring at her in an evil way. At that moment, Ziling and Lin Feng entered the room as well. They were, just like Zi, completely soaked. Besides, Lin Feng was wearing a silver mask to cover his face. Ziling was feeling cold and remained silent. When she saw the evil expression on the face of the 3 people, she felt a bit scared. Zi also noticed that these 3 people were staring at them. She coldly looked at them and even released some cold qi. These people were certainly not good people. But she remained vigilant. After all, they were not in the Ziwei village mountain anymore and had to be careful. She dragged Ziling to the other side of the hut and sat down. Lin Feng picked up some wood in the thatched hut and piled it up in front of Zi and Ziling. He immediately lit a fire. That would be a good way to get dry and warm. He was unceasingly putting wood in the fire to maintain it. These 3 people looked at Lin Feng, who was lowering his head taking care of the fire. He seemed like he hadn't even seen these 3 people. So useless. I really don't understand what Daddy was thinking when he decided not to come and to let that piece of trash come with us, said Zi, thinking that Lin Feng could do nothing but simple chores. Instead of thanking him for tending the fire, she was just making fun of him while her eyes were filled with disdain. She had an unfavorable opinion of Lin Feng and it wasn't going to change, no matter what he did. Ultimately, she despised Lin Feng because she thought that Lin Feng was weak, but if she had known that Lin Feng was stronger than her own father, how would have she reacted? Zi didn't know that all the things she said didn't affect Lin Feng because Lin Feng did not put her in his eyes and did not care about her at all. He was, of course, not going to pay attention to her words. Of course, he also didn't have a favorable opinion of Zi. Big brother, what do you think about these 2 girls? Said one of the 3 people while looking at Zi and Ziling. His evil smile resonated in the area. I like the one who's acting coldly. Nice chest, nice bottom. She looks mature enough. It would be a real pleasure to sleep with her. I just don't know if she'll keep acting so cold while in bed. The man looked fascinating. He was staring at Zi, whose clothes were completely wet. Her clothes were so wet and sticking to her skin that her nipples were erect. That was, indeed, an alluring sight for this man. When Zi heard what the men were saying, her face turned even colder. She was staring at them and released a cold energy. Big brother, that one doesn't seem to be any fun. I still prefer the small one. Not only is she cute but her figure is also not bad, said the one who hadn't talked yet. Lust was flashing in his eyes while staring at Ziling. These 3 people were loudly chatting as if they had no restraint. They were staring at Zi and Ziling like a starving man would look at food. As far as Lin Feng was concerned, nobody paid any attention to him. Ziling and Zi got closer to each other. Even though they were quite aggressive, in such a situation, they were still feeling a bit scared. How shameless, try and speak that way again. Zi was releasing her qi. She stood up and looked at the 3 people. Nice figure, we can even see the shape of her breasts. The man who was being called Big Brother by the 2 others was staring at Zi's body as if he was looking at a naked woman. 3 evil alpacas, you really are extremely perverted, your reputation is well justified. At the moment when Ze was getting angry, a cold and detached voice interrupted them. Immediately, they saw a young man wearing golden clothes enter the thatched hut. 3 evil alpacas, you really are extremely perverted, your reputation is well justified. At the moment when Ze was getting angry, a cold and detached voice interrupted them. Immediately, they saw a young man wearing golden clothes enter the thatched hut. Even though it was raining heavily outside, that young man's clothes were magnificent and completely dry. He looked clean and handsome. He was holding a fan in his hand, he looked elegant and had just come from a luxurious carriage. The 3 evil alpacas, when Ze and Ziling heard that name, their facial expressions immediately changed. These 3 bastards surprisingly were the 3 evil alpacas. No wonder that they looked so evil. In the region surrounding the Golden Z Mountain, these 3 disgusting brothers were known for their extreme perversion. They were known for cruelly and violently molesting young girls. If Ze and Ziling had been their target, the outcome would have been unimaginable. "Who are you?" coldly asked the 3 evil alpacas while looking at that young man. "While Zichong's big ceremony is close, you go out and hunt young girls, right?" said the young man while raising his head and smiling coldly. He then moved towards Lin Feng's side, bent down and shook his fan above the fire grow fierce. "You are a man too, how come you are not helping these 2 girls when they are being humiliated?" coldly said the young man in golden clothes to Lin Feng while smiling. He sounded arrogant and conceited. Lin Feng raised his head and glanced at the young man. He was about as old as Lin Feng. He looked quite handsome. He seemed to come from a wealthy family. It was obvious at first glance that he was wealthy and considered everyone beneath his notice. The young man in golden clothes was smiling warmly but looked arrogant and had a mocking attitude. Lin Feng didn't reply to him, he continued feeding the fire. However, he didn't have a favorable opinion of that young man. If he wanted to be in the limelight, why did he need to go out of his way to humiliate Lin Feng? Why would you care about what the 3 of us are doing? If you don't want us to hurt you, it's best for you is to leave now, said the 3 evil alpacas coldly while staring at the young man. The young man didn't even look at them. They still felt a bit wary when seeing the young man disregard them. The young man in golden clothes glanced at them and a mocking smile appeared on his face. The 3 evil alpacas are vile, they are 30 years old and don't practice their cultivation. They just spend their time with young girls all day. The elder brother has broken through to the 4th Ling Qi layer while the 2 others brothers have broken through to the 3rd Ling Qi layer. In their current life, all they can amount to is bandits. The 3 evil alpacas narrowed their eyes and evilly looked at that young man. "By meddling in our business, your intention is to show these 2 pretty girls that you are hero, right? Who doesn't love beautiful women? I am no exception, but I also cannot ignore people in distress. Besides, if I have the opportunity to rescue some beautiful girls, of course, I will seize that opportunity," said the young man while looking at Ze and Ziling in a charming way. He had a warm and tender smile on his face. He slightly nodded towards them. Ze and Ziling's hearts started beating faster. That young man was so handsome. They were wondering how strong he was. "Since it was your decision, don't blame us for being cold-blooded." 2 of the 3 evil alpacas stood up and slowly walked towards the young man. Suddenly, a violent energy emerged from them and moved straight towards the young man. Ze and Ziling were staring at the 2 brothers and then looked at the young man to see how he was going to react. At that moment, the 3rd brother suddenly threw himself at Ziling looking like he had planned this surprise attack much earlier. He was very quickly approaching Ziling. "Be careful," said Ze when she saw the 3rd brother move towards Ziling and grab her. Her facial expression drastically changed. Ziling had only broken through to the Ling Qi layer, she couldn't compete with the 3 brothers. Besides, at that moment, Lin Feng, who was calmly sitting on the ground, raised his head. There was an extremely sharp and cold expression in his eyes. At that moment, Lin Feng raised his hand. However, at the same time, a magnificent golden sword twinkled in the atmosphere. The light it diffused made it look like it was raining gold. It was dazzling and full of splendor. That sword light was gorgeous. That light then suddenly enveloped the third brother's body. Immediately after, a horrible shriek spread through the atmosphere. The third brother's body fell down onto the ground. He hadn't paid attention for a brief moment and ended up being struck by the attack. A myriad of injuries, caused by the golden light, appeared on his body. Ziling's eyes were wide open, she was still nervous. How dangerous! But that sword, how gorgeous! Ze was stupefied as well. She was blankly staring at the corpse lying on the floor. It wasn't only the third brother who had fallen down onto the floor. The second brother had also collapsed and a myriad of wounds had appeared on his body. The young man was way too quick. They hadn't even seen him attack, but two people were already dead. How strong! And that sword skill. Ze was looking at the young man and her eyes were filled with admiration. That young man was extraordinary and extremely strong. She adored him already. Golden Rain Sword, the golden rain that fills the sky, you are Lin Haojia. The big brother of the three evil alpacas was astonished. He also looked slightly scared. Lin Haojia, also known as Golden Rain Lin Haojia. Surprisingly, it's him. Ze and Ziling were surprised when they heard that name. Lin Haojia was very famous in that region. Zi Qiong, of the Zi government, was his good friend. Even though he was young, he had already broken through to the fourth Ling Qi layer. Besides, because he was a sword master, he easily killed cultivators of the fourth Ling Qi layer. Outstanding young men like him were rare. You taught us a good lesson, I'm off. The big brother of the three evil alpacas was shaking and rushed towards the exit of the thatched hut. He was extremely quick. But Lin Haojia's sword was even faster. The sword rain fell down and the body of the big brother collapsed before it reached the exit. He was motionless on the floor. When Lin Haojia saw the body on the floor, a smile filled with satisfaction appeared on his face. He then put back his sword in its sheath with grace and elegance. Do you two beautiful girls plan to go to Golden Z Mountain as well? Asked Lin Haojia while looking at Ze and Ziling with a warm and soft smile on his face. He was looking at them in a very seductive way. Yes, said Ze while nodding in a delicate way. Her voice was soft as well. Coming across each other today was fate. I am lucky to have met such beautiful girls today. However, it is now late and getting dark, the rain has stopped as well. I will not disturb you, have a good rest, said Lin Haojia while smiling. Immediately after, he turned around and left as elegantly and gracefully as he entered. But when he arrived at the door, he started walking slower and said, considering that two beautiful girls like you are staying overnight in here, don't let useless cowards near you as they might try something. While talking, Lin Haojia continued walking towards the exit. Immediately after, they heard his horse neigh, he had already left. As far as the useless coward was concerned, Lin Haojia obviously meant Lin Feng. When they saw him leave, Ze and Ziling looked like they were disappointed. Ze, sister, we haven't thanked him yet. Ziling suddenly sighed and Ze slightly shook her head while saying, do you think that Lin Haojia is that kind of person who expects something like a thanks? You're right, said Ziling while slightly nodding. He's a really outstanding young man. It's nothing like him, surprisingly he wears a mask because he doesn't dare let people see his fear, said Ze mockingly while glancing at Lin Feng. Lin Feng continued feeding the fire with wood and said in a cold tone, he's not as good as you two think. What gives you the right to speak about other people? If he hadn't been here, some bad things could have happened to us. You think that you could have escaped unharmed? I really don't understand why our father made you come with us. When Ze heard Lin Feng criticize Lin Haojia, she couldn't help but be disgusted. She already had a crush on Lin Haojia. Absolutely, Lin Feng, you should be thankful to Lin Haojia, said Ziling's swords were also her specialty. I owe him nothing, He hasn't done anything for me. Besides, you owe him nothing either. He hasn't done anything which deserves gratitude, said Lin Feng as calm as always. As far as Lin Haojia is concerned, maybe what he had done looked great in the eyes of the two girls, but in Lin Feng's opinion, that young man was too arrogant. He attempted to humiliate Lin Feng and considered everyone else beneath his notice. Not only that, but he also thought he was better than everyone else. You're really hideous, Lin Haojia, and you have the same family name, but you have nothing in common. Now, get out of the hut, said Zi while following what Lin Haojia said before he left the hut. If you want me to go, I don't care, but I would like to warn you that things are not always as they appear. I will prove that before I leave. Lin Feng stood up, looked at the big brother of the evil alpacas, who was lying on the floor, and said, "Hey you, how much longer are you going to play dead? You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."